The Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by the Aiden Forecast, an investment newsletter with weekly updates of leading market indicators and a monthly deep dive into what the details of the economy and the markets mean for investors and retirees. On the web at aidenmarkets.com.
Wines have some of the highest pesticide levels in our food chain. This hour brought to you by ecowine.com. Pesticide-free wines, organic wines, imported from France by the Organic Wine Company, ecowine.com.
The Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by Super Beets. Super Beets are sourced from non-GMO beets, and they're packed with dietary nitrates, helping to produce nitric oxide for more energy, stamina, and support for healthy blood pressure levels naturally. For more information, call 800-223-8242 or visit freespeechbeets.com. Hey, it's the Thom Hartmann University Book Club, and today we're reading from Robert Draper's book, When the Tea Party Came to Town. And it was actually, the original title of this book when it first came out was called Do Not Ask What Good We Do. And this is the only book that tells the story of how the Republicans got together the night that Barack Obama was being inaugurated and decided that for the next 4 or 8 years, they were going to do everything they could to destroy our first black president's presidency. And so I'm reading from the prologue, and he's talking about how Frank Luntz had organized that dinner that I was just mentioning. He was very happy about that. The dinner tables were set in a square. This was at the Caucus Room restaurant in a private dining room. It was a little restaurant down at the corner of 9th and D Street. The dinner tables were set in a square at Luntz's request so that everyone could see each other and talk freely. He asked that Gingrich speak first. Gingrich was happy to oblige. And, you know, it goes on through this. Pete Huckster said, so we're in the depths. And then we get right into it. They would take back that this was their plan. You know, what their party had done from 94 to 2000, what the Democrats had done from 2006 and 2008, the Republicans would want to do again. They would take back the House in November 2010. Then they would use the House as the Republicans' spear point to mortally wound President Obama in 2011. They would do this and retake the House and the Senate in 2012. They would do all this, but only if the American voter blessed them to do so. It made no sense they all agreed to attack Obama personally. He was too popular. Got to be about ideas, said Eric Cantor. Democrats now controlled everything and were already with a monstrously priced economic stimulus package showing their true colors. Given time, they'd screw things up, as the GOP had. But, said Paul Ryan, everyone's got to stick together. Ryan, a 38-year-old Wisconsin congressman and numbers fetishist, whose shiny earnestness recalled an Ozzie and Harriet America. Ryan hated squabbling among conservatives, the paleos versus the neos, the socials against the moderates, and on for as long as he'd been on the Hill, which was most all of his adult life. Ryan had long sought to be the Republican Party's glue, pleading for adherence to principles and data. At times, he looked like the underfed, hollow-eyed child of alcoholic parents. Well, the only way we'll succeed is if we're united, Ryan told the others. If we tear ourselves apart, we're finished. But, he added, he liked what he was hearing now. Everyone at the table sounded like a genuine conservative. It was a place to start. If you act like you're the minority, you're going to stay in the minority, said Kevin McCarthy. We got to challenge them on every single bill and challenge them on every single campaign. That's Kevin McCarthy. Luntz viewed McCarthy as one of the Republican Party's emerging stars, an easygoing, unthreatening guy who understood that language and appearance mattered as much as substance. Nonetheless, the poller and media guru interjected a cautionary note. One of the worst political performances I've ever seen, he said, was when the Democrats took over the House in 2007 and Nancy Pelosi shut out the Republicans and everyone whined about it. If any of you behave that way, I'll go on TV and hold you accountable. Luntz tended to get carried away, but everyone knew he had a point. Senator John Kyle began to focus on immediate tactics. He pointed out that Tim Geithner, Obama's nominee to be Secretary of the Treasury, had failed to pay his Social Security and Medicare taxes during his 3-year employment at the International Monetary Fund. Kyle sat on the Senate Finance Committee, which would be conducting Geithner's confirmation hearings the next morning. The Arizona senator intended to go after the nominee. I'd like to hear your thoughts on the approach I should take, he said to the others. There was a pattern here, Gingrich pointed out. Charlie Rangel, the new House and Ways and Means Committee chairman, hadn't paid taxes on his rental property income in more than 2 decades. Randall and Geithner would be wielding more power over how taxpayer dollars would be spent than anyone else in America. And then there's the web, chimed in McCarthy. There are freshmen who accept campaign money from Rangel. They're caught in the web. McCarthy suggested that they waste no time smacking down the New Democrats for the TAC ads. The dinner lasted nearly 4 hours. They parted company almost giddily. The Republicans had finally agreed on a way forward. Go after Geithner, and indeed Kyle did the next day. Would you answer my question rather than dancing around it, please? Show united and unyielding opposition to the president's policies. 8 days later, Minority Whip Cantor would hold the House Republicans to a unanimous no against Obama's economic stimulus plan. Begin attacking vulnerable Democrats on the airwaves. The first Democratic National Republican Congressional Committee attacks would run in fewer than 2 months. Win the spear point of the House in 2010. Jab Obama relentlessly in 2011. Win the White House and the Senate in 2012. You will remember this day, Newt Gingrich proclaimed to the others as they said goodbye. You'll remember this as the day the seeds of 2012 were sown. Well, not so much, but I'd say that this is when the seeds of 2016 were sown. Forgotten, or at least not discussed that night in the caucus room, was what had been sown in America by January 20th, 2009. That was the day the meeting happened, the day that President Obama was sworn into office. On that evening, while the ruling party celebrated in tuxedos and the minority party retrenched over steaks and red wine, U.S. unemployment rate had climbed to 7.6%, the highest such indicator of national misery in 18 years. Things could get much worse. Joblessness in America would exceed 8% the following month. By May 2009, the number would climb to 9.4%, and by October to 10.2%. And it goes on. It's a great book, Robert Draper, When the Tea Party Came to Town.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Welcome to the Thom Hartmann Program. It is Thursday, May 11th, in the week that I think will be known as the slowest news week. The slowest news week in quite a while. But who knows? We're in the age of Trump. Maybe this will be what a slow news week looks like for the foreseeable future. I am filling in for Tom because he is working on a documentary on climate change, and I'm going to be here today and tomorrow. We've got great shows for you, and to kick it off, I have the distinct pleasure and honor of having John Nichols on the phone with me. John is the national affairs correspondent for The Nation magazine and a preeminent thinker and writer. And John, it's just a real pleasure to have you on the show with me.
Well, you're way too generous to me, but I'm honored to be with you.
So, John, I have to admit that I'm really happy to have you on the phone because I am at somewhat of a loss for trying to wade through the implications of everything that we've seen this week. And so I just want to kind of ask you, how are you seeing this?
Well, I'm seeing it as a week where a lot of things that we knew were going to be challenges and concerns in a Trump presidency came to a head. And when I say we knew, what I'm talking about is that as we examined Donald Trump, there was always a lot of debate about, how he would serve as president and what policies he would follow, who he would empower. But one thing that we were absolutely sure of, going back to his reality TV show days, is that he likes to fire people. He likes to make big decisions in very dramatic ways to remove folks from positions who don't fit his agenda, who don't fit in with what he likes. What's fascinating about this week, though, is that he chose to do so in so remarkable a way, so really kind of over the top way. This obviously we're talking about the firing of James Comey. That I think he may, and I underline that word may, have undone himself, at least to some extent. And let me explain two ways in which I think that is the case. First off, nobody has to be a big fan of James Comey. You can have all sorts of criticism of him. You can have great frustration with him. You can even note that Donald Trump had the power to fire an FBI director. But when you fire the director of an agency that appears, by all accounts, to be investigating your associates, your campaign, potentially, again, we underline the word potentially, even your own actions, you're not just firing somebody because they're not doing the job in the way you like them to do it. You are firing them because you don't want them to continue to investigate you or your associates or your campaign. Again, all this, stuff that's been talked about. And so what you end up with is a situation where even those who may defend your right to fire someone, even those who may accept that the person you're firing isn't the greatest player in the world, have to be concerned about how and why you are doing it. There have to be fundamental questions. So that's the first thought that comes into play. And it has unsettled not just Democrats, but a lot of Republicans, because it was done in such a ham-handed and really bizarre way. You didn't even have the guy in the same city. It was done apparently on a very fast timeline. It was done in some incredibly bizarre ways, especially references to questions of whether he was under investigation. Trump emphasizing in his letter to Comey, thanks for telling him that he wasn't under investigation. And so you have this whole kind of strange approach to it that, I think has unsettled Republicans. I think it's loosened up some Republicans, particularly in the Senate, who have suggested that this is a problematic situation and become more open to inquiries and investigations. So all that's number one. And a quick number two. The most damaging thing that has been done here is that the Attorney General of the United States, Jeff Sessions, who got caught out in his testimony to the Senate, answered no to questions about ties and contacts with Russians, and then turns out that he had those contacts, recused himself from inquiries into these issues, and then here in this bizarre situation is actually recommending removing the head of the FBI. Sessions undid his own recusal, abandoned it, and I think put himself in an incredibly difficult position for anybody who's paying attention to what's going on. I think he damaged the Department of Justice terribly. I think he damaged his own already tarnished reputation. And he also called into question the timeline and the approach of this firing of the FBI director. So you have two very major things. One, I think a loosening up of the discussion about how Trump is approaching these things, causing even Republicans to be very concerned, to a real exposure of Sessions as somebody who can't be trusted at his word.
And I think it loosening up Republicans, I think I think it has to happen. And I want to get to the, I think maybe political naivete that comes out of the Trump White House often, not understanding the need to have good working relations with Republicans on the Hill. And I want to return to that, but just focusing on the Democrats right now as well, and just political. And there are deeper institutional issues that have been brought up. With Sessions, it looks to me like there is even at least a case to be made that he's put himself in a position where impeachment could be on the table, or that he hasn't followed the rules that he himself set up for himself. he's supposed to be helping put in place the next director in the search for the next director of the FBI, which is investigating Russia and everything that happened with Russia. And yet Jeff Sessions said he was going to recuse himself. So there's so much here. But on the Democratic side, just politically, it feels to me like I don't see any reason at all why there shouldn't be absolute total unity on the Democratic side to now oppose Trump in literally every single thing that he tries to do until there is some independent investigation into Russia and what happened with Russia and the campaign. Because mainly in politics, because why should they? Why should the Democrats give even a millimeter at this point when Donald Trump has just thrown this very this amazingly un-American looking action and called into question his general competency to be the president of the United States of America. So what do you think about that? The resistance in the grassroots is emboldened, but also I feel like the resistance from Democrats on Capitol Hill has to be emboldened by this action.
I think you put a lot on the table there and a lot of important things. Let's pause to emphasize a couple of key points. First off, we don't know everything that has happened as regards Russians, hacking, interventions with the election. There's a tremendous amount of charges flying around, a lot of people saying a lot of things. What we do know is this. There have been expressions of serious concern as regards contacts between people associated with the Trump campaign in 2016 and people from outside the U.S. who may or may not have had as their intent some sort of intervention in the politics of the country. These concerns, again, sometimes really stretching into hyperbole, going too far, because we haven't confirmed all these things, are clearly alive in the land. People are aware of this, they're conscious of it, they're concerned about it. The FBI has clearly been investigating, and that investigation has not concluded all sorts of things as regards Donald Trump, hasn't concluded all sorts of things as regards his campaign, hasn't concluded all sorts of things as regards his associates. So what we say is this is open. This is something that is being examined. But if the news reports are correct, what we recognize is that in recent weeks, James Comey, as head of the FBI, became increasingly engaged with, concerned about these allegations, and saw avenues by which this inquiry should be expanded and advanced. There are reports that he sought more funding or at least more support for this inquiry just days ago. And so here we are at a pivot point where great big questions have been put on the table, great big concerns have been expressed. They go deep into the president's circle. They raise real concerns about him and people he's entrusted. You have, obviously, the inquiries as regards Flynn, but also others. And there's a desire to expand that, and then suddenly the guy is gone.
John, can you stick with us through this next break and stick with us to talk about this?
Yeah.
John Nichols, who is the national affairs correspondent for The Nation magazine, going to stay with us and keep talking about this extraordinary action that Donald Trump took in firing the FBI director. We'll continue this discussion right after this.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
We're keeping this discussion going with John Nichols right after this. Welcome back to the Thom Hartmann Program. I'm filling in for Tom. I'm Alex Lawson. And still with us on the phone is John Nichols, the national affairs correspondent for The Nation magazine. And John, I fully appreciate the carefulness with which you are saying we just don't know the facts when it comes to Russia. And I think that is so important because the only way that we will know the facts is if there is an independent investigation. And now what Donald Trump has done, in my eyes, is, a sort of legal. He has definitely acted as if there is a lot there, right? In removing the person in charge of that investigation, he has definitely made it seem by his actions that there is a there. And if he was thinking that this was an action that was going to help make the story go away, his miscalculation, I don't think, could have been greater.
I totally agree with you. In fact, that's obviously, as we were, went to the break there, that was the point I was making. Here you have a tremendous amount of churn around this investigation. Far from being finished, it looks like it's actually hitting its mark, getting to places where we might get some answers. And in fairness to Donald Trump, where you might have some people cleared, you might have some, clarity that could even be beneficial to the president, right? But instead of letting the investigation go where it should, letting it expand if need be, getting the resources to resolve these issues, the president removes the guy that's in charge. Now, if he had removed Comey the day he came into the White House and said, look, I watched what this guy did during the 2016 campaign. I just don't think he did a good job. I don't trust him. We need a new head of the FBI. That would have been one thing. But no, it comes at the point where Comey is literally going to Congress and talking to Congress about these precise issues. And so the removal is in and of itself something that should give clarity to everyone. And that's Democrats, you're correct, but also Republicans who may be very, very conservative ideologically, but that are, in fact, responsible players as regards how the government operates. They should all be in agreement that this is not normal. It can't be normalized. It cannot be accepted. And so the concern you express is a really important one. We should not look at the Democrats and say, well, hey, guys, what have you come up with here? What are your theories? They should be coherent in their critique and in their demands. That coherent approach makes it easier for responsible Republicans, of which there are some, to align with them. And so I do think there's a challenge here. Now, what do you ask for? Obviously, this is a difficult situation because there are many, many things you could ask for. A special counsel, a special prosecutor, a special commission. You could examine accountability issues. You could, the Senate could be looking at a censure for Jeff Sessions, or could be looking at the impeachment issue as you appropriately raise it.
John Nichols is going to stick with us to continue and finish this discussion of what the ask should be, the clear ask, right after this. Welcome back to the Thom Hartmann Program. Still with us on the phone, national affairs correspondent of The Nation, John Nichols. John, I think you're exactly right that there's a lot we don't know, and we shouldn't get ahead of ourselves. And I think that's really important. And that's why I think a call for an independent investigation should be the rallying cry of the Democrats on the Hill and probably the grassroots as well, that we need an independent, a trustworthy investigation. But I'd like to hear what you think about that, because is that the right thing to be asking for?
I think that it's one of the right things to be asking for, but I don't necessarily think it's all of what you might ask for. Remember, when we talk about having a coherent plan, when you have some sort of vision for what you're going to demand, it doesn't have to be just one thing, but it does have to be a response that makes sense, not merely to your fellow members of Congress, say if you're a Democratic member of the House or Senate, but also to the American people. So what might your asks be? I think at this point, because of the chaos in the FBI, the mess that has been created by this firing, but also by kind of the ongoing questions about how the FBI is operating on all this, an independent inquiry of some sort makes sense. Now, that doesn't exclude the FBI, but it makes sense that there should be an independent inquiry. I have qualms about commissions because I think that they often take so long to operate that you end up in a situation where the commission approach ends up taking sometimes years to get to a resolution. So I like the idea of a special counsel or a special prosecutor. There's obviously legislative steps that have to be taken in this regard, and that becomes difficult. But I think that making a clear demand for some sort of special inquiry, whatever it is of those ones that we've talked about, that's step one. Step two, I think it is essential to put pressure on President Trump as regards the next head of the FBI, because this is an important agency and a powerful agency that is investigating not just this, but so many other issues. That next head of the FBI has to be independent from Donald Trump.
Mm-hmm.
And so what I would suggest is that Democrats ought to actually start talking about names, acceptable and unacceptable, and make it clear. Don't be reactionary, but actually, put proposals forward here. And then finally, last but not least, I really emphasize that Sessions thing. Sessions is abandoning his recusal. He is undoing the requirements he placed on himself and stepping back into the middle of this whole process. I don't think that's acceptable. And so I would hope that in the Senate, where you can obviously easily do a censure proposal, doesn't mean it will pass, but you can do it. I would hope that someone would put forward a censure proposal. That could become a vehicle to demand that Sessions come back to the Senate Judiciary Committee and answer questions about his obviously inaccurate, dishonest, many people believe, answers to the committee when he was there. So that's one vehicle. The other vehicle beyond censure, and again, even if not all Republicans back this, the point of just putting it down, laying down the proposal, I do think that, as you'd mentioned before, impeachment is a legitimate option to discuss. And I don't like it that people put impeachment off the table. Remember, impeachment is not removal from office. It's the beginning of an examination of whether someone should be removed from office.
John Nichols, national affairs correspondent for The Nation magazine. Read his piece, Trump Fires Comey, Putting the Country on the Verge of a Constitutional Crisis.
You're
right
listening
now
to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
We'll be right back with more of the Thom Hartmann Program after this.
And welcome to the Thom Hartmann Book Club, Thom Hartmann University Book Club. Today we're reading from Tears We Cannot Stop, A Sermon to White America by Michael Eric Dyson, who was a guest on our program a while back. This is from page 86. One of the great privileges of whiteness is not to see color, not to see race, and not to pay a price for ignoring it, except, of course, when you're called on it. But even then, the price pales quite literally in comparison to the high price black folk pay for being black. We pay a price too for not even being able to derive recognition and financial reward for the styles that make the world want to be black so bad that they don't mind looking like us as long as they never ever have to be us. If the appropriators can freely rip off our culture with no consequences, those who revise racial history, the fourth stage of white racial grief, are even less accountable for their deeds. The way of the racial revisionist when it comes to black life and history is simply to rewrite it. Their motto is, it didn't happen that way. There's a flood of writing that tells us that the Civil War wasn't really about slavery, but about an effort to defend states' rights. But, my friend, you've got to put yourself in our place and see the absurdity of such a claim. Defend the rights of states to do what? To enslave blacks. But even here, the irresistible logic of whiteness, that is irresistible to whites themselves, and to all of us who are subjected to white whim, springs into full action. White American history is so powerful that even when it loses, it wins, at least in skirmishes within whiteness itself. From the right wing, there is the belief that the Civil War was fought over the ability of individual states to beat back a federal government out to impose its will. From the left wing, there's the belief that the Civil War was a conflict between the planter class and the proletariat. In each case, race as the main reason for the war is skillfully rewritten, or really written out. Slavery is rewritten too. Some white Christian apologists contend that black folk needed slavery to save their souls or to rescue their cultures. A contemporary twist on this argument radiates in thinkers like Dinesh D'Souza, who claims that American blacks brought here through slavery are now doing far better than their African kin. Some white critics argue that since blacks sold other blacks into slavery, bondage was a black man's problem, not a white man's burden. But revisionists would much rather describe the dehumanization of black folk as little more than a commercial transaction. It's another way of washing their hands of racial responsibility. The effort to rewrite history surfaces in how Malcolm X is treated in the mainstream. It hardly seems likely that the culture he fought with all his heart could be depended on to grasp his true meaning. Malcolm is often read as an apostle of violence, as a frightful figure consumed by destructive rage. Yet the truth is far more complex, and Malcolm was far more complicated. But isn't the autobiography of Malcolm X so enduringly appealing because it shows Malcolm giving up hatred as a means to racial justice? Now, Malcolm X believed in the liberation of black folk from the mental and psychological chains of white supremacy. He was not committed to nonviolence as a way of life or as a method of social strategy. He believed that such a commitment prevents the full realization of black emancipation. Yet he was not personally violent. As Ossie Davis says in his eulogy, responding to the claim that Malcolm preached hate and was a fanatic and a racist, quote, "Did you even talk to Brother Malcolm? Was he ever himself associated with violence or any public disturbance?" End quote. The rage that flowed in Malcolm's veins was the rage against a force of whiteness that aimed to wash its black kin from the face of the earth. The urge to rewrite black history occasionally gives way to the final stage of white racial grief, which is simply, when it comes to race, dilute it. That is, to argue that black stuff doesn't just plague black folk. To summarize, bad stuff happens to everyone. This argument surfaced in the aftermath of Hurricane Katrina, and that storm certainly hit black folk, but it hit white folk too. This is the sordid version of reverse American exceptionalism. It is the same Me Too impulse that flares in the bitter battle against affirmative action. Beloved, I can't help but notice that affirmative action is the bee in so many of your bonnets. You look around in your classrooms and you think every black person is there because they got an unfair shake from the system. You look at your job and you think that your black coworker got an unjust nod of approval from the powers that be. You never stop to think how the history of whiteness in America is one long scroll of affirmative action. You never stop to think that Babe Ruth never had to play the greatest players of his generation, just the greatest white players. You never stop to think that most of our presidents never rose to the top because they bested the competition, only just the white competition. White privilege is a self-selecting tool that keeps you from having to compete with the best. The history of white folk gaining access to Harvard, Princeton, or Yale is the history of white folk deciding ahead of the game that you are superior. You argue that slots in school should be reserved for your kin because, after all, they are smarter, more disciplined, better suited, and more deserving than inferior blacks. That's like concluding that the Cleveland Cavaliers can't possibly win the NBA championship because they're down 3-1 to the Golden State Warriors. Throw in the towel and call it a series. But they must play the series to determine the winner. Whiteness is having all the advantages on your side, the referees blowing the whistle for you, the arena packed with only your fans. In fact, whiteness means you never even have to play the game at all, at least not in head-to-head matchups with the talent and skill of black folks. Here's We Cannot Stop by Michael Eric Dyson.
Want Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
Welcome back to the Thom Hartmann Program. I'm Alex Austin, filling in for Tom, who is actually currently working on a documentary on the effects of climate change. And, you know, there's so much happening in D.C., so much topical news that it is actually a struggle to ensure that we also talk about the issues that are just there, that we need to focus on, that we need to take action on, that we, the people, are always going to be the leaders on. We cannot wait for Washington, D.C. to act because they're just not going to. And climate change is one of those that is so clear that there's too many politicians in the pockets of big oil and the extractive industries. But the power in our hands is extremely great. So acting together, we can actually take on climate change. And joining me in studio right now, Dr. Karina Bassler from Green Festivals, which you can check out at greenfestivals.org. Dr. Bassler, thank you for joining us on the Thom Hartmann Program.
Thank you for having me, Alex. I really appreciate it.
So tell us a little bit about your organization, what you do, and what your focus is.
Sure. The Green Festival Expo is America's largest and longest running green living and sustainability event. We do bring together the latest and very best in green living, and we have thousands of green products from food, from solar, home and garden, yoga. We have inspirational speakers, educational workshops. We have a family fun pavilion. We believe that we as a consumer, we are the one who can make the difference. And we do have our show upcoming here in Washington, D.C. This will be our 13th year in a row at the D.C. Convention Center. We're open to the public. We are really a diverse community, and we really want to invite and embrace everyone. So all day on Saturday from 10 to 6 and on Sunday from 10 to 5. And don't forget, it's Mother's Day weekend, in case you have not made a brunch reservation for your mom yet. And I know there are people out there who haven't. Just take your mom, take your whole family, and just come to the Green Festivals. We have so many offers, and we have so much fun going on, and we really want to make sure everyone is invited.
So I actually I know all about the DC Green Festival because my business partner, Kimon Freeman, and I's radio station, We Act Radio, we've been a media partner for many years because we at We Act Radio and just individually, we really do fully believe that the power that individuals have in choices that they make, in consumer choices that they make, has a tremendous amount of power when it comes to tackling the issue of climate change. So what do you think I have a theory or a philosophy that what we really want to do, here, let me go the other way. Sometimes people are like, oh, I can't do all the things that I'm supposed to do. And so then I'm going to not do anything because if I don't do it all, then I'm not doing enough. And I think that we as a movement really need to encourage people to do the best that you can. Even small changes add up and they're cumulative. So what do you think about that concept?
Alex, you're literally speaking out of my heart. It's there's this disconnect between the changes you can make and also the changes you cannot make. So I feel right now there's this focus on the government and abroad and what we cannot do and what we cannot change. But we should not forget we as a consumer, we're very powerful. We are basically voting with our dollars to where to invest our money in which companies. And we have to create the demand. And if we create a green, sustainable demand, the companies will follow.
Yeah, and we already are seeing this. We're seeing there are some amazing companies out there that are doing amazing work. We're seeing, even though the big oil is subsidized, not just through just pure cash subsidies, but also in limiting their liability, which is almost incalculable, the costs to the consumer on that. If they had to actually factor in all of the actual costs, oil would not be a cheap form of energy.
Absolutely.
But even with that, even with those massive structural advantages that big oil has, we're seeing remarkable strides in terms of solar, in terms of other renewable energy, that the business case is there, that there is a big money business case in sustainable technology and sustainable products and sustainable business models. And consumers are the reason that that is happening. It's because consumers are stating, they're voting with, their consumer choices, and they're saying, we would rather actually pay, if it has to be, slightly more if we know that we're not destroying the planet.
Absolutely.
Talk a little bit about that.
Well, people sometimes wonder, how can I make a difference? What can I do in my everyday life? And honestly, obviously, we have to eat breakfast, lunch, and dinner. And this is the easiest influence, the easiest decision we can make. What are we putting on our plate every day? And 51% of the CO2 emissions are actually caused by animal agriculture, not by all the transportation combined, planes, military. If you combine it all together, it's still animal agriculture. And that goes back to actually which diet you're following. So if you go ahead and go with a plant-based diet, you actually can mitigate climate change right away. You don't need the government. You can do it. So let's take our money and let's invest into green products. And at the Green Festival Expo, we do have those green, tasty products where people can shop, they can sample, they can see what works for me, they can discuss and network with like-minded people. We want to make sure we really invite everyone. You don't have to be vegan, you don't have to be green. We want to make sure we reach out to everyone who wants to make a difference nowadays. And it's time. We really cannot wait for the next generation to make that change, to make the difference. We have to protect our resources right now. And you know what? It is possible. And it's also fun and entertaining. We want to make sure at our shows that people can bring their families, bring their mom, get some gifts which keep on giving, buy some wellness and green beauty products. But also we have an incredible lineup of speakers. At 2:30 on Sunday, we have Dr. Jill Stein, the Green Party presidential candidate, joining us, talking about how to create jobs with sustainability and how to make this transition. We also have Gene Bauer. He's a founder of the Farm Sanctuary, talking about animal agriculture. And again, what can we do as a consumer? We have a vegan vegetarian food court. We have solar devices. If you want to get your garden ready, we have fantastic home and garden products and how to save water. Basically, how to work, live, and play green with products that are accessible and also affordable. Because sometimes people feel, I really want to make a difference, but I don't know how, and where can I get those products? And they're so expensive. But at the Green Festival Expo, we want to show people it is easy.
And the DC Green Festival this weekend at the DC Convention Center on Saturday, 10 to 6 p.m. and Sunday, 10 to 5 p.m. People can go and just find out more about choices that they can make that would benefit not just the planet, but also they're not. So let's take the plant-based diet. Mm-hmm. I think some people think, oh, well, if I'm not vegan, then, that is it's a 0 or a 1. It's a binary choice. But that's not true. You can reduce your consumption of animal products. You can increase your consumption of sustainable products. Right. And each step that you make in that direction is a great thing.
You're absolutely right. Even the small changes will make a big difference. And I would like to recommend to people just to try it out. Those vegan products, they're full of protein. It really helps for your health as well. It reduces the blood pressure. It's just good for in the long run for the healthcare system. There's really a bigger picture involved. And the more and more people learn about it and open their heart and see what we're doing to the animals and see how easy it is nowadays to try those great, delicious products we have, I'm sure many, many people will follow.
Dr. Karina Basler from greenfestivals.org. Thank you so much for joining us on the Thom Hartmann Program. If you're in D.C. this weekend, going to the D.C. Green Festival at the Convention Center. You can find out more about the festivals nationwide at greenfestivals.org. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you again, and thanks for all your great work. Appreciate it.
We'll be right back.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit thomhartmann.com for audio and video archives.
We'll be taking your calls right after this.
Let's see here. Alan in Beaumont, Texas. Hey, Alan, what's on your mind?
Hey, Tom, how you doing?
Good.
I want to make a couple of quick observations. First of all, just to make a point, it's like if anybody doubts that there's unequal justice in this country, speaking to you as a black man, let's say as a black man growing up, I'm as aware of crime as anybody else. And as a black man, you always knew that, let's say, for instance, if you go out and commit a murder, if you committed a murder and the person was white, you knew that you were pretty much guaranteed to either get a long sentence or a life sentence as opposed to, say, killing another black man.
Right, or a death sentence, yeah.
So if anybody doubts that there's unequal justice, even when it comes to police, and I'm not saying that these people shouldn't have been charged, but the two black cops in New Orleans that, inadvertently killed, the suspect was white. He had his son in the car with him, and they were shooting at him, but they ended up killing his son. Within 72 hours, those police were arrested.
When was this?
I think it happened sometime last year, maybe.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
Yeah, it definitely happened.
Yeah, no, I remember the event. I don't remember the details, and I just wanted to make sure it wasn't some new thing that,
So as far as justice is concerned, it's always been the color of the victim and the color of the perpetrator, as far as who's more likely to get justice in those situations.
Right.
Now, the other point I wanted to make was this. Based upon the events of last week and the last few years, everybody's wondering, what's the answer? To me, our biggest problem in America, and Lord knows we have many, but our biggest problem is an allegiance problem. And I'm not even going to say race because I know there's no such thing as racist, but people have allegiance to their color first, or they have allegiance to their religion first, or they have allegiance to their socioeconomic status first. If everyone would be more committed, if their first obligation in their life was to doing right, then that would go a long ways towards eliminating a lot of the problems that we have.
You make a really brilliant point, Alan, and that is that it is human nature to kind of circle the wagons on behalf of your own. And this comes out of our need to protect family. I mean, I'm sure it's wired into our DNA. And then family expands to community, expands to clan, expands historically in other societies to tribe, but in our society to community, to state, to nation. And so if we could replace not replace, but if we could supersede, if we could make the larger commitment a commitment to the overall society. What's good for all of us as Americans? And start talking and have a serious conversation about, how do we make sure that everybody, regardless of color or race, regardless of race or socioeconomic status or regionality or whatever, has access to health care, has policing that is not unreasonable, has some relative certainty, safety in terms of housing and employment and reasonable employment, then yeah, we take a first step. Alan, thanks for the call. Good to hear from you.
Welcome back to the Thom Hartmann Program. I'm Alex Austin, filling in for Tom, who is on location working on a documentary about climate change. And we just had a great guest on talking about the DC Green Festival which is coming up this weekend. So hope you can go check that out, or go to greenfestivals.org to find out more information around the country. And I want to go and take a call. Marcia in Florida, you're on the line.
Hi, thanks for taking my call, and you're doing a great job.
Oh, thanks, Marcia.
I was hoping you were going to have some call time for people to ask John Nichols some questions, but I'm hoping I can go ahead with what I would have asked them.
Yeah, ask away.
Okay.
I know. I wish I could have had him on the whole hour and taken calls with him. Maybe next time.
Yeah. First of all, Donald Trump could have avoided a whole lot of trouble for himself if he wasn't such an airhead and told Comey that he wanted his resignation and allow Comey to resign instead of just openly fire him like crazy. But that aside, I think what's going to even make this firing worse, if you can imagine it being worse, is the very next day. What happened the very next day when Trump invites Lavrov and Kissinger and the Russian press to be present in his Oval Office and denies the same courtesy to the American press. That stinks. And I don't understand why the American press is letting it roll off their shoulders like water off a duck's back. They should be screaming. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, I'm looking up. There's a story I also saw that it was on Raw Story, where the White House then today said that they'd been tricked by the Russians. Now I can't find it. Because they didn't know that they were going to use the pictures, that they didn't know that they were going to find. Yeah, here it is. They tricked us. White House furious. Russia posted Trump photos on official government accounts. So it's, again, to me, a lot of it it's another piece of evidence that this is a president and an administration basically filled with rank amateurs, people who are incompetent at a level that has really not been seen before. And
absolutely.
And they just, I mean, like, it's like one thing after another. Marcia, did you see the new Quinnipiac poll that just came out yesterday?
No, I didn't, but I did see the Raw Story this morning.
Yeah, they tricked us. And you're like, wow, how did you get tricked? But in the new Quinnipiac poll, and there's a lot in there, the poll numbers falling incredibly fast for both Donald and the Republicans. And I'm not going to be very nice on this part. I mean, but it's funny to me. But it does show what people are seeing from this White House. There's this second to last question on here is, what is the first word that comes to mind when you think of Donald Trump? And they asked it, right? So it's just one word that comes to mind. And the number one most stated word was idiot. The number two was incompetent. And the number three was liar. And it's striking to me.
How can you be proud of your president?
Idiot, incompetent, liar. That is not a troika of strength and stability that, or beacon to the free world that the United States is used to. We're just not used to a president and administration that seems to trip over itself at every single turn. And Marcia, this is my theory. The reason for all of this is because Donald Trump is not at all interested in being the president of the United States of America, i.e. in public service to our nation. He is actually treating this just like he treats everything else that's happened to him in his life as how can it benefit me? And that, as long as that is how he's approaching this, and if you think, like, look into that mindset, everything makes sense. So he fires Jim Comey because he thinks that he's a personal threat, or he doesn't like him personally. And thing after thing after thing, I think makes sense if you look at it from through the lens that he is not interested in being the president of the United States. He's interested in how can he make being the president of the United States work for Donald Trump personally. Marcia, thanks so much for your call. And I'm going to try to take one more call before we go out to break. And I'm going to go to Darren in California. You're on the line.
Hey, Alex. Hey, what would happen if Donald Trump is found that he revealed the Russians that were working with the U.S. government, and he revealed their identities to Putin and got them killed? What would happen then?
That's a great question. I don't know the exact answer to, but you might be referencing the fact that right after the election, there were
the dossier.
Yeah, there were a lot of stories that came out about Russian counterintelligence activity in Russia, where people were arrested as accused American agents. And I mean, I think that if it was knowing, we're talking about the highest crimes that exist in our country. For either Donald or anyone in his circles. Unknowing, you're also talking about the highest crimes that exist in our country. And I think that those questions, while we don't know anything about that, right? We don't have the data or the information, but those are the questions that an investigation is going to uncover, whether that happened, whether that didn't happen. And that's why it's so clear that we need a independent investigation. Darren.
Yes.
What do you think about that?
Why, I think that you're right. And I don't know. I think the Republicans are history. I think that they're going to be known as Russian collaborators, all of them. I don't think they're going to exist anymore. And I think that their Fox News was the way that they controlled the masses, and they don't have that anymore. And I just think the Republican Party is going to be dead, and I'm glad to see it. That's what I think.
Darren, thank you so much for your call.
Okay.
I agree that the Republican Party, that's what I think. I was speaking with John Nichols earlier, and there's a lot there. In just pure politics, there does have to be many, many discussions in many, many offices in terms of the Republicans. What benefit does it give to them to hitch their selves to Donald Trump, to hitch their star to Donald Trump? Because he could easily pull them down if that's where he's going. And I think that is what's those discussions are happening all around this town right now. You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. We're going to be right back.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
The Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by the Aiden Forecast, an investment newsletter with weekly updates of leading market indicators and a monthly deep dive into what the details of the economy and the markets mean for investors and retirees. On the web at aidenmarkets.com. Wines have some of the highest pesticide levels in our food chain. This hour brought to you by ecowine.com. Pesticide-free wines, organic wines, imported from France by the Organic Wine Company, ecowine.com. The Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by Super Beets. Super Beets are sourced from non-GMO beets, and they're packed with dietary nitrates, helping to produce nitric oxide for more energy, stamina, and support for healthy blood pressure levels naturally. For more information, call 800-223-8242 or visit freespeechbeets.com. It's the Thom Hartmann University Book Club. Today we're reading from The Crash of 2016, which even though it's 2017, this book is actually more relevant than ever before, and I think one of my most important books. This is from the introduction. I was around 10 years old, a total science fiction junkie. Amazing Stories, a pulp magazine of science fiction short stories, commentary, and science news arrived every month, and that meant that on that day, all homework and play were forgotten. These were some of the most brilliant stories written for a penny a word by people such as Robert Silverberg, Jack Vance, Poul Anderson, and Frank Herbert, who would go on to become the biggest names in the field of fantasy and sci-fi. And one particular story haunted me for years. 8 years later, when the first men landed on the moon, that story brought back to me as if I'd read it the day before. In the story, a group of astronauts are finally, for the first time, going to blast off from Earth and circle the moon. It had never been done, and because our moon doesn't rotate on its axis like we do relative to the sun, but instead circles us with a single side always facing us, nobody had ever seen the dark backside of the moon. These men would be the first in human history to do so. The rocket roared to life from the launch pad, the astronauts chatting with mission control as they hurtled toward the moon. When they got close enough, they let the moon's light gravity grab their space capsule, and with a few deft rocket thrusts, they put themselves into orbit around it. They were unbelievably excited, as were the NASA folks on the ground, chattering back and forth about what they hoped and expected to see. Is the dark side of the moon identical to the front, or was it more mountainous? Might it be frozen water there, since it has a different exposure to the sun? Might there even be wreckage there from ancient astronauts or something else exotic like that? Anything was possible. As the astronauts began their turn around the backside of the moon, Mission Control told them they'd lose communication because the giant mass of the moon would block their signals, so they prepared for radio silence. But as they made the turn, they could still hear Mission Control. What they saw as they glimpsed behind the face of the moon, we see on full nights, brought an audible gasp from all of them. One picked up the microphone to radio the ground and tell the horrible story. Another knocked the microphone from his hand with a warning gesture. They continued to circle around the backside of the moon, and the view became clearer and clearer and even more ever more undeniable. Should we report it? A debate, virtually a fistfight, broke out in the capsule. What would it mean for Earthlings? What if nobody believed them? What if they were quarantined upon returning and imprisoned or sent to a mental hospital? I remember what they saw that was so horrifying to the astronauts. The backside of the moon was missing. They were looking into a concave half ball of the front side of the moon, which was made of canvas stretched over an elaborate superstructure of 2x4s nailed together like the scaffolds that held up roller coasters from that era. This science fiction story from my childhood also tells the story of America today on the verge of the crash. On the surface, everything seems okay. Our politicians still talk about promise, hope, and change, and we applaud and feel inspired. The world still uses our money. We still have the strongest military in the world, and our standard of living is still far better than the third world's, though worse than most of the developed world's. We're still by far the wealthiest nation in the world with too many billionaires to count. We still have civility in the streets. We have reality TV and fancy cars. We still vote, at least those with the driver's license and birth certificate. As long as you don't look too closely at our nation, things seem under control. The United States looks whole. The economically, militarily, and scientifically superior United States, as we've come to know it in the past 80 years, seems intact, not only for the whole world to see, but from afar, but also for those of us who live here. But when you go back around the dark backside of our nation, you see the shocking truth. There you see a nation whose core fundamentals have been hollowed out, replaced by balsa wood stilts, and wrapped in a frayed canvas of nationalism and bravado.
a cloak similar to that worn by nearly every great superpower that has ever existed on the planet just before its own eventual collapse. Unlike the canvas moon, the United States was once full and complete. Many of us still have memories of that era of the middle class through the 1940s, 50s, 60s, and 70s. But today, that middle class, like the canvas moon, has been hollowed out. Middle class neighborhoods still exist across America, but now they're teetering on stilts of mortgage and credit card debt. As then Labor Secretary Robert Reich testified before Congress in 1994, the net national savings rate, he said, which was at a relatively robust 8.2% of GDP during the 1970s, has dropped to a barely visible 1.8% in the early 1990s. That was just a decade and a half into the Reagan Revolution. Today, it's far worse. The AP headline from February 11, 2009 says it all. Americans have negative savings rate. Hollowed out, too, is our nation's democracy. The spectacle of national elections confronts us every other year, but behind the pomp and circumstance, our democracy has been corroded into an oligarchy as billionaires finance their own political candidates and corporate-funded think tanks do the work once reserved for elected officials in writing and passing legislation. Stripped clean and hollowed out, the United States is more vulnerable today than it's ever been, including during the Great Depression and Civil War. Those fortified pillars that supported a booming middle class are stolen, and without them, America teeters on the verge of the next great crash. Ultimately, this book is a story of how America was dragged into this crash. We are standing today at the edge of the fourth great crash and war in American history. The previous three, each about 80 years apart, were gut-wrenching in their horror and bloodshed, but they ultimately transformed America in ways that made this a greater and more egalitarian nation. The book, The Crash of 2016, The Plot to Destroy America, What We Can Do to Stop It.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Welcome back to the Thom Hartmann Program. I'm Alex Austin, filling in for Tom, and joining me in studio, Washington director for MoveOn.org, and my friend Ben Wickler.
Great to be here, Alex.
So I was saying in the break while we were talking, watching your social media is actually it's making me tired because there are so many things happening. I emailed Tom. I was like, hey, good thing you picked a slow news week for me to be guest hosting. But it's literally, it's just like one after another thing. And, right now I had John Nichols on earlier. We were talking about Comey, and I've seen all of the work that you're doing. I just want to say one thing. Move on and your allies. But it's like, I saw you put the word out to call that action. I mean, it was like when the firing happened, right? I mean, it was nighttime.
Yeah, it was like probably 2-3 hours after the firing.
And so what, like 12 hours later? What?
Yeah, I think we had about 15 hours from the time Move On sent the email saying we need a rally outside the White House tomorrow to demand an investigation of Trump now that Comey's been fired. And then, a day less than 24 hours, a lot less than 24 hours later, we're outside with about 500 people outside the White House. Chairman of the Democratic Party, leaders of a whole range of different groups, and a huge crowd of people just chanting shame, shame, shame loud enough that actually we could be heard in the White House briefing room. We were hearing from reporters who were inside that they could hear the crowd chanting outside, which is very satisfying. Was
Spicer still hiding in the bushes at that point, or had he?
No, he only hides in the bushes in darkness.
In darkness.
Yeah.
No, this isn't. It's right. It's only in darkness that he hides.
Democracy dies in the bushes. That was a tweet I saw someone do. I love it.
But seriously, that action was really powerful, and I think it shows kind of the heat and the outrage that people have over this. Just tell us about that. What is the ask? What do you think people can do right now?
Yeah.
As the resistance, I feel, is even more engaged right now and it's been engaged, but now it's like kicking it up even another level.
We're like on turbo mode right now. So that happened in D.C. yesterday, and that happened at noon. It's worth noting, 500 people showed up at noon on a work day with a few hours notice. Well, most people only heard about it when Move On texted. We didn't want to text our list at 11 p.m. the night before. So we texted our members in DC at like 8:30 a.m. on Wednesday morning, and boom, they were there 3 hours later. Across the country, we also anchored a slew, dozens of protests outside of Senate offices that happened in, cities and towns all across the country last night. And the key thing about that is that our big leverage is not just public opinion directed at the White House. It's that senators could force something to happen. And that to me is like the central strategy here. So there's sort of two different ways that it could go down. The thing that people have been sort of focused on and calling for that you hear more publicly is the thing that the Congress should obviously do, which is set up a bipartisan select committee that can investigate this outside of the intelligence committees. The reason why that won't happen is that McConnell and Ryan do not want to do anything that could impede their ability to hand out giant tax cuts to the rich. But if you had 3 Republican senators side with Democrats, they could block every Trump nominee from being confirmed. They could block even reconciliation bills on votes on bills, and basically hold up the entire Trump agenda until there's a special prosecutor named by the Deputy Attorney General. And that is the central thing. There are now several Republicans that have expressed their concerns, that have said that they want a special prosecutor. If we can actually get them to put their action where their mouth is and join a solid block of Democrats, they could basically, hold all progress hostage until, in the best possible sense of that phrase, until a special prosecutor is appointed. And that's where we need to go. So pressure on the Senate is actually the big lever that constituents, citizens have right now to force some truth about the what's happening with the Russia-Trump collusion.
And it's really the investigation, right? That we need to know that the investigation into the facts, which we don't have, but that the investigation is not tainted by political pressure. It has to be independent.
That's absolutely right. And it goes, so there's two things. There's that, and also it goes beyond that. So first, on the that level, the FBI is the entity that has resources to do the investigation. So even like the Senate investigation is relying on the FBI to provide them with all the intelligence and information. So if the FBI is basically hostage to the political fortune of Donald Trump, if agents feel like their jobs are on the line, if they're reporting to a Donald Trump crony who's just doing his bidding, then there's no other investigation that can succeed. That's why it's critically important. You have to have somebody who's appointed within the DOJ who's insulated from political pressure, who can direct resources, command agents, actually make stuff happen. So that has to happen.
Because how could an agent in the FBI right now actually not feel that their career is at risk if they just watch their boss get fired?
Absolutely. That's the thing. So that's the second level of this, is that not only do we have to get to the bottom of what happened with Trump and Russia, but also every other possible way that the Trump administration could be held accountable is at risk if we don't get a special prosecutor here. Because if you can just get away scot-free with firing the person who's investigating you, then anyone who's noticing corruption over here, or who's noticing abuse of power with the IRS, going after political enemies over here, or anything that the Trump administration does, will be off limits for investigation if this most high-profile abrogation of the role of the Department of Justice goes unpunished. So that's why not only is the giant Trump-Russia issue at stake, but basically any attempt to have the rule of law enforced and applied to this administration is at stake here. That's why it's worth shutting down the Senate over this. It's worth breaking some furniture here, because frankly everything is on the line.
I agree. Everything is on the line. I like your very clear call. I also think there is a case to be made that kitchen sink is okay here too, that those same three Republicans should be on call, that the next head of the FBI cannot be a Trump crony.
Absolutely.
Has to be somebody who, in fact, I think there needs to, and I should just admit, I'm just stealing this from John Nichols. He said this just an hour ago.
Okay.
And I'm just going to.
I love John.
Yeah, and I'm like, I agree with that. And now that's what I think, which is the Democrats should already be offering names of these are acceptable heads of the FBI who we feel would be, untainted and are not cronies. And so there's that. And another thing John mentioned, and I think this is a good one, and I haven't heard it anywhere else, is a censure of Jeff Sessions for his role in this, for his, he supposedly recused himself,
for
but
totally breaking his promise.
But now he's back in the middle of it.
Yeah.
Do you think that is, there's a lot to be said for a really clear ask, but there are a few different things that we could be moving on at the same time on this.
Yeah, I think all those things should happen too. I mean, these aren't exclusive of each other. I think one thing to me is that we shouldn't actually confirm a new FBI director until there's a special prosecutor.
Until there's a special prosecutor.
So having the right person is good, but I don't think we should move forward with that process. I think Democrats, the Democrats in the Senate have the power to do what's called withhold unanimous consent. Because every time the Senate does anything, it starts with, I ask unanimous consent that we, move to this next item on our agenda. And if one senator objects, then they actually have to go through a roll call vote, and it slows things down. They do that like hundreds of times a day. So Democrats should just be like raising their hand and objecting to everything until we get a special prosecutor. Once we get that, let's have a good FBI director. I actually did you see Senator Mike Lee, super arch conservative, his tweet with a suggestion? He tweeted Merrick Garland would be a good new head of the FBI.
That's a great one.
I think that's a great idea. Yeah. Mike Lee and I don't often agree on stuff, but this,
I am seeing things like that though, that this is at the level of threat to our democracy and is being recognized around, but in both parties at some level. Not Mitch McConnell, not Paul Ryan, because they are dead set on looting the public coffers and giving it to their criminal friends on Wall Street as fast as possible. That's how I say it.
Yeah, that's a good shorthand.
But there are, I think, finding 3 Republicans on this is very, very reasonable. And because the outrage, here is one of the things that boggles my mind. Sure. How did Donald, because you've read all the things that they're like caught off guard by this, right? Like how did they not know that this is exactly, how did they think that this was just going to be like, oh no, that's fine.
Yeah. How did the White House know?
Yeah.
So it's stunning to me, right?
It's stunning.
My general theory of this, so there's this idea of theory of mind. It's a concept that like at a certain point when there may be 2 infant humans develop a theory of mind, which is the idea that there's someone else has consciousness and they can imagine themselves in someone else's shoes. So like, you want something even if it's not something I want, for example. So I don't think Donald Trump has theory of mind. I don't think he's able to actually project himself into the shoes of anybody else and figure out like how they might react. So he was just thinking about how he reacts. How he would react. And
which is also like the lack of empathy. And when I talk about it, like a lot of this makes sense if you recognize that he doesn't have a concept of public service. Yeah. So he's not looking at being the president of the United States. He's looking at how being the president of the United States can benefit Donald Trump.
Yes.
And in that frame, all of his actions, you're like, oh, yeah, I can see how,
Right. This does help him. The stunning thing is that he only talked to this very close circle around him, and none of them warned him about this. I'm surprised that Pence couldn't figure this out. He told Pence he was going to do this. Pence didn't say this will be a total disaster. You know what I mean? And then he called Lindsey Graham, and apparently Lindsey Graham said, yeah, he's got to go. Chuck Schumer was like, this will be a mistake if you do this, Mr. President. And mistake is actually a great way to phrase it.
Yeah.
It's like a stupid, disastrous, terrible mistake, as well as an act of malevolence.
As a student of history, right, you actually can recognize this from all throughout history, right, where what they call strong man, who are actually weak man, trying to be the executive in a government, and so they surround themselves with people who will not challenge them, right? And we have like case after case after case in history of how that actually will take down an entire civilization.
Yeah.
And in fact, those students of history were the people who were like, you know what we're going to do? We're going to have these checks and balances so that that doesn't happen. And that's why this is such a fundamental threat, is because he is challenging those checks and balances. In the last 30 seconds in this segment, what do you think?
So that's exactly right. There's just one big flaw, which is that the founders did not anticipate partisanship. And that is where Republicans are breaking the constitutional system. They're not exercising their check on the executive branch.
Yeah, they're just going along with it.
It's dangerous.
I just will read these 3. These are the top 3 words in this new Quinnipiac poll. I'm going to do it all show long because I think it's interesting. When describing Donald Trump, what are it's idiot, incompetent, and liar. Those are the top 3 words in describing Donald Trump. Ben Wickler is going to stick with us for the rest of the hour, so stick around. We'll be right back on the Thom Hartmann Program.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Ben Wickler and I are going to be taking your calls coming up on the Thom Hartmann Program. Welcome back to the Thom Hartmann Program. I'm Alex Lawson, filling in for Tom. Sticking with us in studio, Ben Wickler, MoveOn.org. And let's go to the phones.
Sure.
Let's go to Stanley in Montana. Stanley, you're on the line.
Hello, mate. Take you off speaker. Hello, can you hear me?
Yep, we can hear you, Stanley.
Hi, Stanley.
There's so much to talk about.
There is.
I'm going to start with about three things. Number one, the corporate media has sold the American people out. If it wasn't for corporate media, Donald Trump would not be president today. He got free publicity. Bernie Sanders got zero. I'm not crying over spilt milk, but I think if Bernie Sanders got just as much media as Donald Trump, he would be our president today. He did not want to be president. And
Donald Trump did not want to be president, you're saying?
He never did. The outlandish things he said, I think he was personally trying to sabotage his own campaign. And it just didn't work, particularly when he talked about being a predator towards women. I mean, I was so surprised that he still won the election. And that's pretty much what I have to say. And other thing is, I think Trump and Pence should both be impeached. And I would like to see the worst possible scenarios, the person from Ohio who ran for president become either the vice president, because I think Pence would be a disaster. And one other thing, this cabinet scares the hell out of me.
Stanley, you had a lot there. I'm going to throw it to Ben. You can pick from the four.
Yeah, there's a lot there that I think millions, tens of millions, hundreds of millions of Americans agree with. I'll just go to this point about the corporate media. There's this amazing article about Jeff Zucker, who runs CNN. And in that story, someone says, he says, I keep talking to people who say, I can't believe you have Jeffrey Lord on the air. I can't believe you have Kayleigh McEnany on the air. These Trump apologists, they're so crazy. And his response is, but you know their names. And his whole theory of the election was like, Trump is the lead character, and we're just going to have these people representing pro-Trump, anti-Trump. Everything revolves around Trump. It is good for ratings. They're like characters in a play. And that is that led to the Trump election, because everything became about Trump's personality instead of what would actually happen to regular people. That's the disaster we're in now, and you're totally right to blame the profit-seeking corporate media for it.
Yeah, Leslie Moonves, CBS, right? He might be bad for the nation, but he's great for CBS.
It may not be good for America, but it's damn good for CBS.
Yeah,
there you go. There you go.
Exactly.
It makes me sick.
And that is, when we get into talking about the corporate media, this is what I really... It just shouldn't surprise people, though, is the one thing, because the corporate media are the propagandist arm of the billionaire class. The interlocking boards, you can actually go to their 10Ks and you can see exactly what they're about. And it is not the news. It is not the truth. It is money. It is only money.
It is worth pointing to right now, there's a new threat on this front, which is the Sinclair Broadcasting Corporation. They made a deal with the Trump campaign to give them unfettered access to their listeners. And now they're about to acquire dozens of additional stations, become by far the biggest private, individual owner of local television stations. This is a huge threat.
We'll be right back right after this. Welcome back to the Thom Hartmann Program. I'm Alex Lawson, filling in for Tom, who is on location working on a documentary on climate change. Still with us in studio, Ben Wickler from MoveOn.org, and the man you will see at the podium, microphone, and all of these things. I mean, Friday it was Trump Care. Yesterday it was the threat to our democracy, and we talk a lot about action and taking action. And something I learned, because right in the beginning of the resistance, I was like, it's not a sprint, it's a marathon. Yep. And then someone was like, it's not a marathon, it's a relay. And I'm like, yes, That's so brilliant. That's how we're going to do it. And so, like, speak to the actual role that activists, that the grassroots play, because they are doing everything. And I feel like you and I, in our roles, actually empower, but the actual power is with the people in the grassroots.
Yeah, right now it feels like a sprintathon, to be honest.
It's a sprintathon relay.
It's a sprintathon relay. So the key thing to know is that at this moment, the most powerful force on our side by far is the grassroots. Elected Democrats have very little institutional power, but they are basically tapping their power from the grassroots uprising and the resistance. And the grassroots uprising is shaping their strategy. So where people show up winds up being where elected Democrats put their focus. And that's why, all of us grassrootsy types have significant power at this moment. MoveOn.org has our sort of theory of what our staff's job is to provide MoveOn members, which are probably a lot of folks watching right now, anyone on our email list, with opportunities to have a meaningful voice in fighting for a more progressive America. So we think of ourselves as like member servants. We look for moments when a public outcry can make a difference and create a platform for people to stand on and fight. So this week, that's meant demonstrating that this Comey thing is not some inside the Beltway, minor issue. This is something that the public is angry about, freaked out about, wants action on. That's why we had a huge protest outside the White House yesterday. That's why we had protests outside of Senate offices last night. We'll keep working on that. With Trump Care, even more so, it's, we created resistancerecess.com, this website where people can go and use data from the Town Hall Project, a bunch of other things, tracking appearances by members of Congress, and then show up at town halls and tell their personal stories about how this will affect them. And then we make sure that the media knows that people will be there. And that has helped reshape the debate about healthcare. I mean, it's not an accident that this is the most unpopular bill that anyone can remember. It's because people are speaking up, they're telling their stories, and they're fighting back. These things don't happen in a vacuum. And so, right now, more than any time I can remember, actually not just calling Congress, but also going out, speaking publicly, making a handmade sign with a Sharpie and, holding the thing up in front of a television camera, no matter where you are in the country. That's the most powerful thing we can do right now, because it is totally reshaping the public debate about what's happening in American politics.
So the new thing that I've seen that I love is Mark Pocan did the town hall in Paul Ryan's district.
Yes.
Right? I love that.
Yes.
And I feel like that strategy or that tactic should be replicated, and maybe it doesn't have to be an elected official who does that. It could be a candidate running for
Andy
office.
Slavitt, who used to run the Centers for Medicaid and Medicare, is going around doing healthcare town halls in Republican districts right now. And if you are a constituent of a Republican who is cowering and hiding from his constituents, probably his most Republican members of Congress overwhelmingly are men. If you're a constituent of a Republican who won't do a town hall, just invite someone to come do a town hall. Find your local, the nearest local Democrat and invite them to come into your district. Democratic members of Congress won't show up unless they're invited. There's actually protocol around this that they don't do that. But you can invite them and they will come, they will speak. You can pack that place, hundreds of people, and that will make news. I guarantee that'll make news and create real pressure on your local Republican to pay attention to what's going on.
I love that tactic. It's such a great way of raising our voices and showing and demonstrating that all power resides with the people. It's not here, it's with us. We'll be right back.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
Ben Wickler's going to be taking calls, your calls with me, coming right up.
Welcome to the Thom Hartmann Book Club. Today we're reading from Hannah Arendt's book, The Origins of Totalitarianism. And I've, known about this book, read little pieces of it for decades. I mean, it's the classic work on totalitarianism. It's long and there's a lot of words in it, but for this moment, Elliot Lustig was tweeting recently about Donald Trump. This is back when Donald Trump was talking about 3 to 5 million illegal immigrants voting, right? And he said, Hannah Arendt, in her book, The Origin of Totalitarianism, provides a helpful guide for interpreting the language of fascists. She noted how decent liberals of 1930s Germany would fact-check the Nazis' bizarre claims about things like Jews as if they were meant to be factual. What they failed to understand, Arendt suggests, is that the Nazi Jew hating was not a statement of fact, but a declaration of intent. So when someone would blame the Jews for Germany's defeat in World War I, naive people would counter by saying, there's no evidence of that. What the Nazis were doing was not describing what was true, but what would have to be true in order to justify what they planned to do next. So did 3 million illegals cast vote in the election? Clearly not. But fact-checking is just a way of playing along with their game. What Trump is saying is not that 3 million illegals voted. What he's saying is, I'm going to steal the voting rights of millions of Americans. So that's kind of a contemporary frame for this book. So let's read from the book itself. Here, this is from page 348. And she's talking about totalitarian movements and how they use propaganda, how they communicate with the public, and the difference between terror and propaganda, the kind of terror that they can inculcate by just kind of randomly arresting people. Pretty much everybody's committed some kind of crime at some point, right? Arresting people, and on the one hand, that's the terror, or convincing the people. These totalitarian movements use socialism and racism by emptying them of their utilitarian content, the interests of a class or a nation. The form of infallible protection in which these concepts were presented has become more important than their content. The chief qualification of a mass leader has become unending infallibility. He can never admit an error. The assumption of infallibility, moreover, is based not so much on superior intelligence as on the correct interpretation of the essentially reliable forces in history and nature, forces which neither defeat nor ruin can prove wrong because they're bound to assert themselves in the long run. Mass leaders in power have one concern which overrides all utilitarian consideration: to make their predictions come true. The Nazis did not hesitate to use, at the end of the war, the concentrated force of their still intact organization to bring about as complete a destruction of Germany as possible, in order to make true their prediction that the German people would be ruined in case of defeat. The propaganda effect of infallibility, the striking success of posing as a mere interpreting agent of predictable forces, has encouraged in totalitarian dictators the habit of announcing their political intentions in the form of prophecy. The most famous example is Hitler's announcement to the German Reichstag in January 1939, quote, "I want today once again to make a prophecy. In case the Jewish financiers succeed one more in hurling the people into a world war, the result will be the annihilation of the Jewish race in Europe," end of quote. Translated into non-totalitarian language, this means, I intend to make war and I intend to kill the Jews of Europe. Similarly, Stalin, in the great speech before the Central Committee of the Communist Party in 1930, in which he prepared the physical liquidation of intra-party right and left deviationists, described them as representatives of dying classes. This definition not only gave the argument its specific sharpness, but also announced in totalitarian style the physical destruction of those whose dying out had just been prophesied. In both instances, the same objective is accomplished. The liquidation is fitted into a historical process in which man not only suffers, or does or suffers what, according to some immutable law, is bound to happen anyway. As soon as the execution of the victims has been carried out, the prophecy becomes a retrospective alibi. Nothing happened but what has already been predicted. It does not matter whether the laws of history spell the doom of the classes and their representatives, or whether the laws of nature exterminate all those elements, democracies, Jews, Eastern subhumans, the Untermenschen, or the incurably sick. They are not fit to live anyway. Incidentally, Hitler, too, spoke of dying classes that ought to be, quote, eliminated without much ado, end quote. This method, like other totalitarian propaganda methods, is foolproof only after the movements have seized power. Then all debate about the truth or falsity of a totalitarian dictator's prediction is as weird as arguing with a potential murderer about whether his future victim is dead or alive, since by killing the person in question, the murderer can provide prompt proof of the correctness of his statement. The only valid argument under such conditions is promptly to rescue the person whose death has been predicted. Before mass leaders seize the power to fit reality to their lies, their propaganda is marked by its extreme contempt for facts as such, for, in their opinion, fact depends entirely on the power of the man who can fabricate it. The assertion that the Moscow subway is the only one in the world is a lie only so long as the Bolsheviks have not the power to destroy all the others. In other words, the method of infallible prediction, more than any other totalitarian propaganda device, works. In the book, Hannah Arendt, The Origins of Totalitarianism.
Want to hear that clip again? Subscribe to the Thom Hartmann Program on YouTube to see all your favorite show highlights. All the important stories we cover and the issues we care about are at HartmannReport.com. Members of our community can comment and join the conversation.
Welcome back to the Thom Hartmann Program. I'm Alex Lawson, filling in for Tom while he's working on a documentary on the effects of climate change. And still with us in studio, Ben Wickler from MoveOn.org. And we wanna talk to you. So let's go to Joe in Washington State. Joe, you're on the line.
Hi, Alex. Hi, Ben.
Hey.
Do you think that there is a connection between the James Comey firing and the attempt to pass Obamacare repeal in the Senate? Because if people on the left are trying to resist Trump over Russia, it seems like Republicans could be given some breathing room to take away health care despite widespread opposition.
It's a really great question, Joe. You want to?
Yeah, so I think this works out really well for McConnell and for Republicans on healthcare for that reason. I don't think this is Trump's plan. Trump seems to be doing this because he got terrified that the FBI was getting closer on Russia stuff. And the Senate Republicans and Democrats only found out about it like an hour before the actual firing took place. So I don't think there was like a concerted effort between Senate Republicans and Donald Trump on this. But it does work out for Mitch McConnell. Because here's the thing. Right now, there are these 13 Republicans who are planning what the Republican Senate bill will look like on healthcare. Those 13 Republicans are doing that outside of regular channels. This isn't through a committee. This isn't through floor debate. There's nothing Democrats can do to slow down their negotiations. So all the stuff Democrats are doing appropriately to just mess things up in the Senate and stop stuff from moving forward until we get a special prosecutor, that doesn't affect Republicans' ability to continue focusing on figuring out a terrible healthcare bill that could actually pass through the Senate. And that is why, even as we fight on the Comey stuff, there needs to be just a flood of grassroots pressure on Senate Republicans right now. So this week, most of the kind of resistance movement energy has focused on accountability for House Republicans. There's something called the Payback Project, Indivisible, and Move On. Some other groups are doing paybackproject.org, organizing die-ins outside of House Republican, like local offices. That's crucial. But pretty soon, we need to start moving and pressuring these Republican senators, and not just to not support the House bill, not to get them to oppose the pre-existing condition stuff, but to oppose any healthcare bill that would take away coverage from millions of people. We cannot move the goalposts to the absolute horror show that is the House bill, because you strip away some of the bad stuff from the House bill, you've still got a total, to use Sarah Huckabee Sanders' phrase, a total atrocity, right? You got a bill that condemns tens of thousands of people to death per year, even without the pre-existing condition stuff. So I think you're right that there's a danger for the resistance movement that we will get totally sidetracked by the Russia stuff. I think we can't not fight that, but we've also got to fight on healthcare. And Senate Republicans need to understand that there will be just an absolute whirlwind. There will be hell to pay if they do what the House Republicans did, jam through a bill and torch the American healthcare system.
So I agree with everything you said, with one sort of caveat. We have to fight on all fronts. And, in my day job at Social Security Works, me and John Bowser-Baumann have been since December going around trying to find 3 Republicans. It's the same strategy, 3 Republicans to vote no on any reconciliation bill that cuts Medicare or Medicaid. And the truth is, they don't have anything that's not going to do that, right?
Because it would mean giving up on their grand dream. You can't do a massive tax cut for the rich without taking money out of Medicare and or Medicaid.
Exactly, or destroying Medicaid, which is what the meat and potatoes of Trump care is. There's lots there, but $880 billion out of Medicaid, it just destroys Medicaid.
Yeah, it's basically you take the inhaler out of the mouth of the child, you sell it, and then you give the money to a millionaire. That's the Republican healthcare plan.
That's the best explanation of their plan that I've heard yet. I will be using that multiple times. Here's the caveat. So we have to do everything at once, but I actually think that they can play in our favor as long as we do everything at once, because if the rage and outrage of the resistance over the Comey stuff is going to, you're going to need some unity amongst the Republicans, right? It's going to be a tough vote, as they say in this town, right? It's a tough vote. And so McConnell's going to be using every stick and every carrot that he has to try to get the votes that he needs. We have to be hammering them to make sure they don't have those votes. And the Russia stuff, we just have to be hammering all around, because at some point, this process is going to drag on. It's a long process.
Yeah.
I mean, you fought on the Obamacare, right? I mean, like, I keep bringing that up.
Yeah. That took like 16 months, right?
They spiked the football after barely the end of the first quarter, and we're like, we did it. And you're like, that's not even close to having done anything. There is going to be a point when, like, the 3 Republicans that we need, they're going to be like, why should I take a tough vote? Yeah. Why should I take a tough vote that's going to accrue to this guy in the White House who is actually dragging me down with him? And in fact, I'm going to get more of a political benefit out of standing up and separating myself from that. And I think the key is the strategy is where I'm in full agreement. We have to be able to walk and chew gum at the same time. We have to fight on all fronts. But if we do it well, I actually think there could be some amplification involved.
Yes, I think that's totally right. So I accept warmly, I embrace your caveat. And the core of this is anything that unites us and divides them strengthens us. And both Russia and healthcare have the potential to do that. Like Trump, everyone thought Trump was actually going to go for stuff that would unite Republicans and divide Democrats. And he's totally failed to do that, which is like, thank goodness he is at least as incompetent as he is evil. But like on this stuff, if you show up for a town hall meeting, if you're there for Russia or healthcare, you can talk about both. You can applaud people asking tough questions about both. So it is good to have 2 major issues that both crack their unity, that make them look over their political shoulders, as long as we don't stop talking about, one or the other of them. Like, we need to keep up the pressure on both. But I do think, part of what's interesting here is these are both things that are indefensible. Like, there is not actually a legitimate argument for their awful healthcare bill. And there's definitely no legitimate argument for firing James Comey to shut down the Russia investigation. So these are both things where we have like very strong moral high ground, and where, if they dodge a question about one, then they get hit with the question about the other and they're just left spinning. Like, this is stuff where we can have them on the run. So as long as we don't get shut down and overwhelmed and, depressed because so much is happening, as long as this fires us up to join the fight, I think it can help. And I think we can potentially win on both of these things.
And I do as well, as long as the resistance stays unified. And what I always say, to be able to do all these things, it's through solidarity that we will find that unity that will create a movement. And so, the most radical act, I use 2 superlatives, and I forgive myself for it. The most radical act you can take is self-care, and the most radical act you can take is to get organized. And oftentimes those are one and the same, because to understand that you're not alone, that you don't have to do this by yourself, that you are standing shoulder to shoulder with your friends and neighbors and millions of Americans.
Absolutely.
That power is good for the people, because they win when they have us cowering, when they have us in despair, and we fight back through unity and solidarity. So I'm just vociferously agreeing with you.
No, I absolutely agree. And you need to, my wife and I have been like delaying date nights for the last couple of weeks. My wife works in healthcare policy also. This has been a very trying time, but like, you need to stake that out. You need to stake out the time to like be human and recover, and not just be, exploding on Twitter all the time. Like, you've got to be a human being in order to fight these fights.
So just, Joe, thank you so much for your call. We only got a couple minutes left in this segment, and I want to actually talk with you about this thing, just get your opinion on it. So this is the Twitter presidency, right? I mean, like, this is the first, Twitter played a role in him winning, and Twitter is obviously playing a role in everything that he does. And we've seen this already in the case of the Muslim ban, that it's like lawyers used to be able to be like, well, you don't know what he was thinking when he did that action, and he says that he was thinking this. Like, their whole strategy on Comey is to pretend that it's about Hillary's emails.
Which doesn't work, because he's been tweeting exactly what he's thinking about.
It's amazing, right?
It is amazing.
And like, I've faced some smart conservative friends of mine who've been like, well, how do you know? And I'm like, hold on 1 second. And I go to Twitter, and you're like, see, he said it right here, here, and here.
It's an amazing thing. And I know some folks that conducted focus groups of people who voted for Obama and then Trump and asked them what broke through. They hate his tweets. This is just a huge Achilles heel for this guy. It will prove his undoing. It is his making and his unmaking. Twitter is, frankly, it's our friend. It is a hammer that he keeps wielding, but he's going to hit himself in the face with it.
I think he maybe already has, and he's so dense he hasn't noticed it yet that, they just 86'd all of his like public statements and stuff off of the website.
Oh, really?
And yet his speeches, and
Yeah.
I don't know why, but that just happened yesterday. And it's like, does somebody not know how the internet works? Because this stuff's around forever. And malice that was in the Muslim ban. In this one, motive is the key, right? Why did he fire Comey? And there's ethical and legal. It's a group of reasonable people, and you present them with what he said at the exact times, and then you're like, okay, well, clearly he fired him because he's angry about the Russia investigation.
It's right there in black and white. Here's the thing. At the end of his campaign, they took away his phone, and he didn't do any personal tweeting for the last few weeks. Do you remember that? That was part of how he won. That was the equivalent of the Comey letter. That was the campaign's masterstroke, was to stop him from tweeting. So if he stops tweeting, then get scared. Right now, it is a gift.
So last couple seconds here. Tell people how to get involved with all the efforts that are going on right now.
Yeah, go to moveon.org right now and sign up. And when you do sign up, put in your phone number and agree to get a text message. Because a lot of these rallies and protests, instant things that are happening, you'll find out a lot faster via text than you will via email. And make sure you stay plugged in.
Moveon.org.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit thomhartmann.com for audio and video archives.
We're going to be hearing what else is happening around there right after this.
I have a question for you. Donald Trump, I guess, is getting a lot of contributions to his campaign.
Millions of dollars.
Yes. When November comes, if he were to lose, what would happen with that money? Because I think he's in it for the money.
I think he is too. With regard to money that has been given to his political campaign for president, I think that there's some pretty stringent limitations on how that can be used. Money that's being given to his various super PACs, though, is, basically you can recycle that money back into your own pocket. As Stephen Colbert demonstrated years ago on TV when super PACs became the thing, after Citizens United, I think it was in 2011, the year after that decision, maybe 2012. And so, I'm not really sure. The one thing that I do believe, and here, I'm wandering into conspiracy theory territory or just, observing the landscape. Donald Trump is hooked up in a very big way with Roger Ailes. In fact, he was basically using Roger Ailes' defense against his accusation of sexual misbehavior with employees at Fox News as part of his defense, right? Oh, it's just locker room talk, that kind of stuff. Roger Ailes is the disgraced former leader and creator of Fox News. Before that, he tried to create GOP TV when he worked inside the Nixon White House. And my guess, and it'll be real interesting to see if I'm right or wrong on this, but my guess is that after the election, if Donald Trump loses, that he and Roger Ailes are going to launch a media company that will take on Fox News. And my guess is they may even do it by buying the failing WorldNet Daily or even the failing Blaze. Right now, Glenn Beck's whole empire is on the verge of collapse if the media reports I've read are to be believed, that he's down to 6 employees, et cetera, et cetera. And so, if Ailes and Trump went in and bought up the Blaze and bought up Glenn Beck's empire, or they bought up WorldNet Daily, or one of the other right-wing ones that have actually established satellite time on the various TV satellites and have a large footprint on the internet and a large subscriber base, then they might be able to give Fox News a run for their money for the right-wing vote, for the right-wing hardcore crazy vote. And so if there's money left over, to bring this back to your question, George, if there's money left over in the super PACs and maybe the campaign. I'm not a campaign lawyer, so I don't know the details of this, but it's not inconceivable that that money could end up helping fund the launch of a new television network or something like that. So, am I making sense, George? What do you think?
You're making a lot of sense to me, Tom. I agree with everything you just said.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks a lot, George, for the call. We'll have to just wait and see how this plays out because Trump is holding this one close to his vest, and so is Ailes. I mean, they're both going through. Thanks, George, for the call. They're both going through kind of a, shall we say, a difficult time. But Donald Trump is going to figure out a way to not to come out of this looking like he has won something, and frankly to make money with it, because that's his metric of success. So, and the media, I think, is ripe for the picking, given all the damage that's been done to the media by Reagan and the Telecommunications Act. We'll be right back.
Welcome back to the Thom Hartmann Program. I'm Alex Austin filling in for Tom, and we are going to hear about what's going on over there, like I said on the way out, because we have on the line Victoria Jones of Talk Media News. Victoria, what is going on over there?
Well, over there, which for me, of course, is over here, President Trump is saying in an interview with Lester Holt of NBC News that he had planned to fire FBI Director James Comey regardless of the recommendation from his Deputy Attorney General. This is contrary to earlier statements from the White House. He says he'd made up his mind to dismiss Comey before he met on Monday with Attorney General Jeff Sessions and Deputy Attorney General Rod Rosenstein, because White House officials, as you know, said earlier in the week that Trump asked Sessions and Rosenstein for their opinions about Comey, and then Trump acted on those recommendations. So he's sort of throwing all that under the bus now. He also maintains that Comey told him 3 times that he was not under investigation. Trump says, I know I'm not under investigation for collusion with Russia. He says he knows that not only from Comey but from other sources, he says. He says he had dinner. He's had a very nice dinner. And he says twice in phone calls. And he says Comey told him that twice, that you're not under investigation. He said, in fact, he initiated one call, Comey initiated the other, and he says he asked Comey that, if he could tell him, and he says Comey told him. Now, the acting FBI director, Andrew McCabe, in testimony before the Senate Intelligence Committee, said that he could not say whether he had ever heard Comey tell Trump that he was not a target of an investigation into possible collusion between Russia and Trump's campaign. But now, on the spot, as the acting director, he also assured the senators that he will alert them to any efforts to interfere with the investigation into Russia's election meddling and possible ties with the campaign. He said so far there's been no effort to impede the investigation.
It's there's a lot there.
Yes.
There's a lot there going on over there.
There's a showboat and a grandstander.
Victoria, what is there any reaction already to the fact that he said he'd already made up his mind? I mean,
well, the White House briefing has just this minute started. I'm in the basement of the White House, and so reporters are about to start asking Sarah Huckabee Sanders questions, but an advisor from the Department of Homeland Security instead is speaking to them about an executive order on cybersecurity that Trump is going to be signing today, having to do with beefing up cybersecurity. So they have not had a chance to have at her yet.
It's just it's really the story just keeps going.
Oh, but wait, there's more. They also said that one of the reasons given for Comey's firing was that he had lost the confidence of virtually everybody in Washington, including all the rank and file at the FBI. And McCabe said, sounding really quite emotional, that it had been, I haven't got the exact quotation in front of me, but basically the privilege of his life to work for Jim Comey, and that it was not the case that Comey had lost the commitment of all these people, all these FBI agents, and that was absolutely not the case. And that is something also that the two heads of the two organizations who represents the agents, he said it's not accurate, who represent the agents, the rank-and-file agents, 35,000 of them, said to Politico yesterday, they said, no, he has the support of the rank-and-file.
I was just going to try to pull it up. The Washington Post piece that just came out yesterday, which was a giant piece of reporting, and they had 30 sources who spoke on it, and there were some rank-and-file FBI. There was a rank-and-file FBI source that really was strongly saying that was absolutely false. And in fact, and I'll find the quote for later in the show, but it straightforwardly said there will be a reckoning because of this.
That's correct.
And that this was basically a declaration of war on the FBI.
Yes, that's right. I saw that quote, too. There was another piece, I don't know if it was the Post piece or the Times piece, but describing raw anger and even some fear in the FBI. I've got what McCabe said. He said, I can tell you that I hold Director Comey in the absolute highest regard. I have the highest respect for his considerable abilities and his integrity, and it has been the greatest privilege and honor of my professional life to work with him.
And just this piece is getting out there now. The inappropriateness in the way that he was fired is a big deal to a lot of people. That a man who had served the public, and you can disagree with him or whatnot, but the way in which he was fired was also unprecedented, I believe. Is that have you been seeing that?
Yes, and in fact, many agents feel that too. Many of these FBI agents are quite conservative and, in fact, supported Trump during the election. But they feel that this was very, very, very disrespectful of Comey, that he should find this out from the TV screens, and they're very, very angry. They are very angry with Trump.
Victoria Jones, in this very slow news week, is there anything else going on out there?
Yes, we're expecting also today that President Trump will announce the details of his voter fraud commission, an executive order on that that will be to launch a review of alleged voter fraud and voter suppression in the election system. Vice President Mike Pence, Kansas Secretary of State Chris Kobach will lead the commission.
Which means that it is actually a commission aimed to suppress the vote. Victoria Jones, Talk Media News, thanks so much.
Thank you.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program, and we will be right back.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
The Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by the Aiden Forecast, an investment newsletter with weekly updates of leading market indicators and a monthly deep dive into what the details of the economy and the markets mean for investors and retirees. On the web at aidenmarkets.com. Wines have some of the highest pesticide levels in our food chain. This hour brought to you by ecowine.com. Pesticide-free wines, organic wines, imported from France by the organic wine company, ecowine.com. The Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by Super Beets. Super Beets are sourced from non-GMO beets, and they're packed with dietary nitrates, helping to produce nitric oxide for more energy, stamina, and support for healthy blood pressure levels naturally. For more information, call 800-223-8242 or visit freespeechbeets.com. Welcome to the Thom Hartmann University Book Club. We're reading today from What Would Jefferson Do? A Return to Democracy. I'm on page 109. These are the title of the chapter is Myths About Democracy in America. Myth. Left to themselves, people would drain the treasury. Reality. They haven't. To the contrary, conservative administrations have. Conservatives are aggressively promoting the idea that democracy is doomed and should be replaced by an aristocracy of large corporations who already largely control the Republican Party because, they say, people are fundamentally lazy and will drain the treasury, simply voting themselves unlimited welfare benefits. This is a slur that is particularly directed against people of color by conservatives in the United States. This myth is especially ironic since the irresponsible fiscal policies of conservative presidents Reagan, George H.W., and George W. Bush mostly created today's budget deficits. Numerous conservative websites promote this myth by quoting Alexander Fraser Tytler, 1747 to 1813, a Scottish politician and historian who allegedly wrote in 1776, quote, "A democracy cannot exist as a permanent form of government. It can only exist until the voters discover that they can vote themselves largesse from the public treasury. From that moment on, the majority always votes for the candidates promising the most benefits from the public treasury, with the result that a democracy always collapses over loose fiscal policy, always followed by a dictatorship. The average age of the world's greatest civilizations has been 200 years." End of quote. Given that USA is over 200 years old, that's a rather scary quote. The problem is that Lord Tytler had his facts wrong. At the time he wrote the statement, if he did, Bartlesby simply lists it as unverified, only one democracy had existed for more than a few decades, Athens. And its end had nothing whatsoever to do with people voting themselves benefits from the public treasury. In 1776, when the quote was supposedly written, the world's second democracy was just being birthed and wouldn't take full form for another decade, so it seems on its face nonsensical. Similarly, Tytler's description of the way nations with representative governments would fail is accurate only if you're counting those democracies that are corrupted by the wealthy and powerful to the point that they've become sham democracies and, in fact, have become feudal aristocracies where the feudal lords are the wealthy individuals or the powerful corporations. History and the experience of the world's mature democracy shows us clearly that when a majority of people participate in democracy, even simply by voting for their representatives, they don't vote to steal the wealth of the nation from themselves. Another myth, liberal democratic policies are socialism. The reality, democracy has nothing to do with collective ownership. Conservative commentators love to roll out this myth when people in a democratic society agree to tax themselves in order to provide for the common good. No rational liberal or progressive in America is suggesting that we should, well, actually, let me back up a little bit. It says, in fact, the Merriam-Webster dictionary defines socialism as any of various economic and political theories advocating collective or governmental ownership and administration of the means of production and distribution of goods, a system of society or group living in which there is no private property, B, a system of condition of society which the stages of production are owned and controlled by the state. So then it goes back to the book. No rational liberal or progressive in America is suggesting any of these things. Have you heard a conservative complain about our socialist police forces or about our socialist fire departments? Of course not, but they're paid for by taxes. Or our socialist roads or our socialist air traffic control system Or best of all, our socialist military with its strict rules that the highest paid may not make more than 20 times the salary of the lowest paid, its comprehensive free healthcare system and its subsidized housing. Indeed, the military might qualify as the most socialist institution in our government, though I doubt they'd like to be called that by conservatives or anyone else. So why do conservatives incessantly apply this label to programs that don't match the definition? It's because the word has such a negative reputation. Socialist and communist nations have, for the most part, been conspicuous failures, killing tens of millions of dissenters in the process. This is as using the word socialist as in the old Union of Soviet Socialist Republics context. Modern democracy is not collective ownership, but a political system in which the voice of the people is not only heard in government, but is the government. The means of production and distribution of goods and services, except those having to do with the commons, like fire and police, should continue to be privately owned. But just as certainly, we the people must take back ownership of our government. This will remove us from Benito Mussolini's vision of a corporate state and leave us in the radical middle place of a constitutionally limited democratic republic, a modern liberal democracy. Myth. Free markets are nature's way of making the winner fit and strong. It's Darwin. Reality. Darwin's method led to more diversity, not less. Conservative activists love to complain about the dangers associated with the concentrated power of government. Indeed, anybody who's ever spent time in the third world, in dictatorships like the old Soviet Union, or in a repressive communist state like modern-day China, and I've worked in all three, understands how dangerous concentrated and unrestrained government power can be. The real problem, however, arises when there are gross inequalities in the size and difference and power of different entities in a culture. This is true whether the giant party is a powerful government, a powerful corporation, or a vastly powerful individual. In any case, ordinary people can find themselves in trouble without a thing they can do about it, no matter how great the injustice. And it goes on from there. The book is What Would Jefferson Do? A Return to Democracy.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Welcome back to the Thom Hartmann Program. I'm Alex Austin, filling in for Tom, who is on location working on a documentary on the effects of climate change. And we are talking about lots of things. It's a very busy news week. But as always, when I get the opportunity to do this, I also want to not lose to the news of the day, these critical issues that we want to focus on. And one of those is criminal justice reform. And joining me now to speak about that is Jenna Mall, the Deputy Director of the U.S. Justice Action Network, joining us on Skype. Jenna, thanks so much for joining us on the Thom Hartmann Program.
Thank you for having me. How you doing today?
Good. So the work that you do is I don't actually remember how it came together, but just recently, like in the last few years, there has been a bipartisan push to work on criminal justice reform. It rose to the level of such absurdity with what's going on in our justice system, where with nonviolent drug offenders, for example, filling prisons and, really unjust things like mandatory minimums and taking the discretion away from judges, things like that, that it just seemed like it bubbled up and now there is some movement on it. Tell us about what your organization does and if you think that that kind of setup is right, that there is this bipartisan work on it at this point.
Absolutely, that's correct. And you know what? That's a great point. It really was about the system becoming so absurd and so broken that the far left and the far right and everyone in between kind of came together and said, we've got to do something. We've got to get better about this. And they all come at it from very different perspectives, right? So there are people that are concerned about the civil liberties involved in the system. There are people that are concerned about the fiscal implications that we spend $80 billion every single year on prisons and jails alone. It's about $250 order of $1 trillion when you look at the whole justice system. There are others that look at it from a faith-based perspective of redemption and rehabilitation, and this belief that we can change and do better. But no matter where you come at this issue, you can come together and say, we've got to find solutions. We've got to find data-driven, research-based solutions to get a better return on our investment. And that is the underpinning of this organization. About 2 years ago, some very diverse funders came together and said, the right and the left agree. It's time to mobilize that rare bipartisan agreement, and it's time to put it to work. So they brought together 8 of the country's most prestigious and most diverse organizations. On the left, we work with the ACLU, the NAACP, Center for American Progress, and the Leadership Conference on Civil and Human Rights. On the right, it's Red on Crime, FreedomWorks, the Faith and Freedom Coalition, and Americans for Tax Reform. And these groups will tell you, and they've said it many times, we agree on almost nothing else. But on this one issue, we stand in alignment. Our criminal justice system is broken, and it's time to get a better return.
So are you mainly working at the federal, at the state level, or at all levels?
Well, frankly, Congress is behind the times. The states have been working on these reforms for about a decade now. They've been implementing really effective data-driven policies to reduce crime, to reduce recidivism, to improve outcomes for people that are involved in the justice system, to strengthen our families and our communities. And we've been waiting for some time now for Congress to get the message and to act, and they failed to do so. And so we really spend a lot of our time focusing on the states because we see far more bold, more aggressive, more impactful legislation coming out of state legislatures across the country.
So, Jenna, if people want to get involved, if the listeners and audience want to get involved, where can they go, and what kind of actions do you think the grassroots can take to make some progress on criminal justice reform?
Absolutely. It's incredibly important. We hear this from legislators quite a bit. You know, they'll say, we agree with you on this stuff. We get why you're working on this, but I don't hear from my constituents. I don't think that they care. And we know that's not true. We know that people care about this issue. We've done polling across the country, and 85 to 90% of the people, and that includes Republicans and Democrats, want to see a better criminal justice system. So the number one thing I would say to do to get involved is call your legislators and tell them that you want to see effective criminal justice reforms in your state and at your federal level. That's all you need to say. There's always going to be a bill pending that they can work on. So if you get that message across, they're going to hear you. And then the second thing I'd say is join us at justiceactionnetwork.org. We are working in about 14 states right now. There's anywhere between 50 to 80 bills moving at any given time. If you get in touch with us, we can tell you what bills are moving in your states that you can get involved with right now.
Jenna Mull from the U.S. Justice Action Network, thank you so much for joining us on the Thom Hartmann Program and talking about this critical issue of criminal justice reform. Everyone needs to go to justiceactionnetwork.org and get involved, take action, raise your voice on this issue. Jenna, thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you. Have a great day.
You too. So I want to hear and take your calls. We're going to go to a quick break, and on the other side, I'm going to do my best to get through as many calls as possible on the Thom Hartmann Program. I'm Alex Lawson, filling in for Tom, and I want to hear from you, so give us a call.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
We're taking your calls on the Thom Hartmann Program right after this. Welcome back to the Thom Hartmann Program. I'm Alex Lawson, filling in, and we're going to go right to Jack in California. You're on the line, Jack.
Hey, Alex. How are you doing today?
Good. Thanks for calling.
Okay. Hey, I want to take you by your hand and lead you back somewhat to the beginning of the Obama administration, and when the GOP shut down the government. I don't know if you remember that.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. And remember how they gathered in a group in the Capitol building and applauded? And then the next day, they found out that guess what? They had just shut down the brand new World War II monument. And they were out there damning Obama for shutting it down. Well, now we have the Republicans again going out in the lawn of the White House, clapping that they actually passed this. I don't know what to call it.
Travesty.
It's not really a medical bill. It's a tax reform.
Mm-hmm.
And it's the same people. The only one that isn't there is the one that got replaced by Mr. Ryan. And I find this so upsetting.
Yep.
I can't see how they can call this bill the American Health Care whatever when it has nothing to do with America. You look at the Senate, who they placed on their thing. It's all GOP. So it should be the GOP medical bill.
Yeah, although, Jack, at the same time, it has nothing to do with health either. I mean, the only thing it has to do with health is stealing it from people. Ben Wickler joined us earlier in the show, and he was in studio, and he had the best description of what Trump Care actually is. There's a child with asthma who's using their inhaler, and the bill steals the inhaler from the child, sells it, and gives the proceeds to rich people on Wall Street. That is the sum total of what their so-called health care bill has to do. So I agree with you. It is the GOP, Paul Ryan, Mitch McConnell, Donald Trump non-health care bill.
Exactly. And that's what they should put it on it. That's how the media should brand it. And then let them try to run on that thing.
Jack, thank you so much for your call. You're exactly right. I will say that every time I say Trump care, I'm implying that whole long phrase that we just talked about. And I think that the media should be honest that there's nothing about health care in this whole bill. It's just a tax giveaway to millionaires and billionaires, to billionaires from Wall Street, the ones in Donald's cabinet. Welcome back to the Thom Hartmann Program. I'm Alex Austin filling in for Tom, and I want to go right to Jack. I'm sorry, I want to go right to Adam in Louisiana. Adam, you're on the line.
Hi, Alex. I'm following on what the prior caller said. I'm lumping mainstream media in with the GOP. Amidst the political theater and with the all-in participation of the mainstream media, Americans have really lost view of the big picture, corporatist attack on our people. There's a pattern of distraction here. Comey's firing, as an example, is a convenient distraction from the coordinated GOP assaults on health care, net neutrality, privacy, free speech, freedom of the press, unions, middle-class poor, religious freedom, education. While there are great organizations like Move On, our defense right now is fragmented and seems wholly ineffective. On May 9th, Truth Out published a really frightening article by Mary Bottari on the Harry Bradley Foundation.
Mm-hmm.
That name sounds innocuous, but this pooling of money is bigger than the Koch Foundation. It's vast. It's ALEC on steroids, moneyed interests have initiated a deliberate blitzkrieg attack, moving forward nearly unopposed because of the mainstream media. And I'm interested in your thoughts.
We had a guest from, what do they call, Wisconsin Progress? We had a guest from one of the organizations that's on the Bradley enemies list on the other day to talk about that. It's a very important story. And Mary and CMD do just amazing work exposing just all sorts of corruption in networks like that. And so I highly recommend everyone go and look at the Center for Media and Democracy expose on the Bradley Foundation, because it is one of the first times we've seen the entire thing laid out, how, you know, each piece is doing their part. The members of Congress, the big money foundations, their AstroTurf, so-called grassroots, and yes, the media. And I don't call it mainstream media because there's nothing mainstream about it. It's just the corporate media. Ben Wickler also mentioned a story that I think is sailing under the radar that is massive, which is Sinclair Broadcasting is moving forward with a huge acquisition to make it just even larger than it already is. This is a very conservative media outfit that is completely biased in the direction of corporate power and money power. And, you know, that is all true. I don't think that the resistance has been futile, though. That's where I disagree with you, Adam. That I think that the millions of people who have raised their voices, who have gotten into the streets, who have gone to the town halls, if they find there isn't a town hall, they've started their own town hall. We have stopped many of the runaway trains that they've tried to set loose. Now, we're going to have to understand that when the Republicans, and, you know, they're dancing to the tune of Wall Street, when they have unified power, the president and both houses of the Congress, we will be served some losses. But as long as we always remember what we're fighting for, we can both resist and oppose and defeat the attacks on our democracy, the attacks on we the people that are coming from the billionaire class, that are coming from Wall Street. And we can fight to build the nation that we want to live in and the world that we want to live on. So, Adam, I really agree that it's critical, I would say. You have to understand your opponent and look at the expose on the Bradley Foundation to get an understanding of just how profound, how deep this network goes, this conspiracy, and this, I don't want to call it a movement because it's a cabal of plutocrats who have used their money to get into every nook and cranny in this country to make it seem like there's broad support for their agenda of making the rich richer and everyone else is left with the bill. And they're actually using Alinskyite tactics in many ways because their numbers are few. So they're creating a din and a clamor so that we feel that they are legion. But they're not. They're not. There's only a few of them. They just got an enormous amount of money. And when you see the Bradley Foundation and how they roll those resources out to project like there is this broad support for their agenda, it makes it clearer how we can fight back. So, Adam, thank you so much for your call. I'm going to keep taking calls. I'm going to go to Jennifer in Oregon. You're on the line.
Today I plant. Yesterday I.
Jennifer, are you on the line?
Hi. I just wanted to play devil's advocate as a flaming liberal. What if the Senate passes the ridiculous health care bill and all of those Republican senators lose their seats, and then finally we will get Democrats in there and we will be able to get single payer or Medicaid for all, or however it works. Part of me just says we almost have to hit rock bottom before we wake people up. So what are your thoughts on that?
Jennifer, thanks for your call. One of my thoughts is always that the devil has got enough lawyers on his own. No one's got to step up to be the devil's advocate because that guy's got tons of lawyers of his own. To the actual question, what you're saying is actually, there's a lot of there are people who believe that. I am not one of them. I do not believe in the concept of heightening the distinctions. I can't remember what it's called, but it's true that sometimes things do get worse before they get better. But I'm not going to hasten the getting worse because I'll tell you just straightforwardly. I worked at outreach clinics. I had clients who lost their health and their lives due to our broken healthcare system, our non-system. And I actually came to this town, to Washington, D.C. I got my master's. I came to this town, got my master's to work to try to make the healthcare system just a little bit better. And with the goal of healthcare as a right for everybody in this country with a single payer system. But I am not going to ever lay off or stop fighting for what I want because I think that in going backwards, hitting rock bottom is somehow going to get us where we want to get to faster. It's not a strategy that I believe in. And I also hold in my mind the clients that I personally worked with and who would bear the brunt of that, right? The rock bottom would not be on which the billionaires cracked their heads. The rock bottom would be where the least and most vulnerable among us would find themselves. And so I don't think of that strategy as one that I embrace. I always fight for what we want. And I think that we're making progress on single payer right now. So where I would be is, yes, we have to fight the resistance and we have to resist and oppose all the things that are coming at us from Trump. But at the same time, we should be shoring up total unified support on the left for expanding Medicare to everybody. So in your state, you don't have senators that you can call to find those 3 Republicans. And you also have Jeff Merkley, who's a huge champion of all of this. But empowering our champions and unifying the Democratic Party to actually foment basically a democratic socialist takeover of the Democratic Party, or at least excising the neoliberal Wall Street wing of the party and their influence. That is the work that we can be doing right now so that when we come out of the resistance and the opposition to everything that Trump is proposing, we are in a position where we can move forward rapidly with an agenda that is based on justice. So that's my general feeling on your question, Jennifer. And thank you for calling in and asking about it, because I think it's a valid question. I just remember who would be harmed, and it's definitely not these guys on Capitol Hill or their bosses on Wall Street. And so I'm gonna just continue to fight these guys on Capitol Hill and their bosses on Wall Street and fight for what we want. So thanks for your call, Jennifer, and we will be right back after this.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
We got more great show coming up right after this.
Welcome back to the Thom Hartmann Book Club. Today we're reading from Point to Point Navigation, a memoir by Gore Vidal. This is from the last 2 chapters, and we're reading from page 258. In 1961, a new president of the United States, John F. Kennedy, was inaugurated at the age of 43. With him, a new generation had taken the crown from the older generation as represented by General Eisenhower.
There was triumphant talk of a new frontier, presumably to be crossed by all of us into a bright new land where the only shadow that marred the prospect was that of the hideous, murderous specter of international communism centered upon the Soviet Union, against whom JFK had sworn to bear any burden to ensure the ultimate victory of freedom, liberty, and so on. But early on, starting in 1959, under the general direction of then Vice President Richard Nixon, who had many interesting Cuban mob connections. Yes, Bibi Rebozo, his mysterious friend, was also linked not only to mobsters, but to the Cuban dictator Batista, who had been overthrown by Fidel Castro, to the annoyance of the mob, an annoyance that turned to fury when Castro shut down, if only briefly, the mafia-run Havana casinos. Elements of the CIA were soon attempting to murder Castro, who, like all Nixon enemies, was, if not yet a communist, worst, a communist dupe. The presidential election of 1960 was a close one, fought by Nixon and John Kennedy, an attractive Massachusetts senator whose father had, ironically, dealings with many mobsters during the pre-World War II period, as well as at the time of the prohibition of alcohol. The late film producer Ray Stark told me how, during the short presidency of JFK, Joe Kennedy and Frank Costello, the retired New York mob overlord, would often have dinner at Kennedy's Central Park South apartment and rehash old crimes, often in the country of a retired teamster who gave great massages. Joe's mob connections were useful to Jack in the 1960 election and could easily have saved JFK's life in 1963 had Bobby Kennedy, in the interest of building himself up in the public eyes, not started arresting important mobsters, particularly in the so-called Appalachian Mob Conference, bust, where they had all come together to confer about the secession of the leadership of the New York mob. I've long since forgotten how I first heard of the plot to kill JFK, while I had no idea at all of the Kennedy brothers' plot to kill Castro on December 1st, 1963, until I read a recent book by Lamar Waldron and Thom Hartmann called Ultimate Sacrifice. It was assumed that the Cuban Missile Crisis of '62 had sufficiently alarmed JFK and Castro's mentor Khrushchev so that they jointly backed down, putting an end, so everyone thought, to such dangerous adventures. JFK had pledged not to invade Cuba if Castro would allow inspections of any remaining missiles on the island. Since Castro did not cooperate, JFK then regarded his pledge as inoperative. In the spring of 1963, according to Ultimate Sacrifice, more a literal than an ironic title, John and Robert Kennedy started laying the groundwork for a coup against Fidel Castro that would eventually be set for what they called C-Day, December 1st, 1963. Bobby, like Nixon before him, was in charge of what would be the most secretive operation of its sort in our history. Since the CIA had, in the eyes of the Kennedys, botched the 1961 Bay of Pigs invasion, the Department of Defense was to be in charge of this adventure, which would first engage mob hitmen to assassinate Castro and then replace Castro with a provisional government that would implore the United States to come to its aid and restore order. Ours is a society riddled with plots of every kind, from, let's say, one to bribe certain members of Congress to cheat Indians off of their casino money, to the financing, often secretly, of numerous presidential elections, while simultaneously great companies like Enron cheat customers, stockholders, and employees. Yet everyone who draws attention to all of this corruption is quickly denounced as a conspiracy theorist who means to undo the great fiction that anything truly wicked, at least in the murder line, must be the work of a solitary lone nut who is simply evil. Hence the setting up of Lee Harvey Oswald as the lone crazed killer of JFK, despite his own brief but presumably accurate statement after his Dallas arrest, "I'm the patsy." Then, as planned, his being gunned down by Jack Ruby, a fellow CIA asset. Oswald as lone killer for no reason at all, and addled Ruby, a one-time Chicago mobster who claimed to be deeply worried about the stress all this must be causing the widow Kennedy. And he goes on in chapter 55. Ultimate Sacrifice describes how the Kennedy C-Day plan was penetrated by three mafia godfathers, Carlos Marcello, New Orleans, Santo Trafficante, Tampa, Florida, and Johnny Roselli out of Chicago. All three were being vigorously pursued by Attorney General Robert Kennedy, along with a dozen of their associates, of whom 6 were also working on the Castro murder case. The crime bosses then used parts of the C-Plan, a.k.a. AM World, to arrange JFK's assassination in a way that would prevent a thorough government investigation in order to protect the coup plan, its participants, as well as, naturally, national security by invoking the secrecy surrounding the C-Plan. The mob bosses targeted JFK twice before Dallas, once in Chicago on November 2nd, JFK called off his motorcade, and then in Tampa on November 18th. He survived unscathed. Ultimate Sacrifice reveals and details
why Robert Kennedy later told several close associates the name of the godfather, Carlos Marcello, who had ordered his brother killed. But he couldn't do anything about it for fear the Soviets might go to war. Ironic and tragic action. I recalled when over the years I'd asked why what happened at Dallas happened, I'd answer, because Bobby had broken a truce made with the mob by Joe Kennedy in 1960. The book, Point-to-Point Navigation by Gore Vidal. Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
The Thom Hartmann Program. I'm Alex Lawson, filling in for Tom, who is on location working on a documentary on the effects of climate change. And there is just a lot of news this week and today, and I've been doing my best to try to wrap my head around it. And so I'm really happy to be joined by phone with our next guest, Bernard E. Thompson, who is a retired attorney, a member of the National Organization of Black Law Enforcement Executives, and had a 22-year career with the FBI. Bernard, thank you so much for joining us on the Thom Hartmann Program.
Oh, thank you very much for having me.
So I don't even know where to start with this story. Obviously, the story being the firing of the head of the FBI, James Comey, by Donald Trump. There's a lot of wrinkles, and just now he's changed it again and said he was going to fire Comey regardless of the recommendation from the Attorney General and the Deputy Attorney General. And there's just so many wrinkles of this. I'd like just first, from your perspective, your sense of what happened and just how you saw it happening.
Well, it's ironic that you would ask it that way, because I had just sent an email last night to a close friend who I've known for some 60 years and said, of all of the crazy things that have been happening in our world these days, I could never have seen something like this coming. Now, on the one hand, it was clear that there was a lot of tension between the White House and the FBI simply as a result of the ongoing investigations, but the FBI not apparently lifting to a higher level the priority that our president apparently wanted on the focus or the investigation of the leaks that were supposedly taking place from day to day. And since some people took the position, many people took the position that the priority should have been on the Russian affair, whatever that means, all that captures, as opposed to the various leaks that came out of the White House, because throughout the history of our republic, it appears as though leaks have always taken place simply because that is the way the United States is allowed to govern with transparency, even if it doesn't want to in that White House, if that makes sense to you.
Mm-hmm.
And so with the tension that was taking place, it was interesting that, and many of my friends call me over the past several months and say, look, you're an attorney. How do you square this business of all of the transgressions that apparently took place by Hillary Clinton and her friends, and I'm including her aide, Huma Abedin, and the emails that were running through her computer that she was sharing with former Congressman Anthony Weiner. They said, how do you square all of the transgressions that Director Comey laid out in his July 2016 analysis with the conclusion that, therefore, or in spite of all of these things, no indictment, no criminal investigation will continue, and there'll be no additional charges. And I said, the only thing that I can tell you is that, and I've not read those statutes that he was referring to that she may or may not have violated, but it made it clear that she might have violated a number of them. But the question came down to, is that one of those statutes that requires specific intent in order for them to criminalize your actions? And because some things are so clear-cut that they require no intent, and other things, if you run a light, you don't have to have intended to run the light, but the violation stands nevertheless. So the question that was in my mind and like minds was whether or not she simply didn't rise to the level of specific intent required by the statute. And you may recall that Director Comey did say on several occasions that it did not appear that she intended to do anything criminal. And for that reason, she was given a pass. But a number of people, myself included, wondered aloud how, with the number of transgressions, you could nevertheless reach that conclusion. But be that as it may, then we moved on to the October surprise. And that was probably the most bewildering moment, because the way I've heard it explained by Director Comey in news media is that he took the position that he was damned if he did and damned if he didn't. And he said that, and I've read particularly articles from the Washington Post, the Washington Times, and the New York Times. Those are my three daily news readers. I've read articles that suggested, and it seemed fairly clear-cut, that as far as the FBI was concerned, the actions by the Russians. I'm sorry. I fast-forwarded.
Mm-hmm.
Still dealing with the October. I fast-forwarded.
Although we are running a little bit tight on time, so we should speed up in the course of history so that we get to the now.
Okay, so I'll skip over the letter because the impact of that October letter to Congress still has sway today, obviously.
Yeah, massive.
Who believe that we would never be in this situation we're in now, but for the intervention by the Bureau through the letter that he sent to Congress. And all I will say about that is that if there was a letter that identified that we were investigating Hillary Clinton, the big question that pops up in many people's minds is why did the Bureau not similarly send a letter to Congress saying, oh, and by the way, we're investigating Russian intervention, Russian hacking, and any interaction between the Trump campaign and the possible Russian intervention. So that seemed a little strange to me. So then when we get all the way up to the current time, the thing that's the strangest about this is, from everything I've been able to gather, the president was stewing in his juices over Comey's day-to-day arrogance and things like that, that he just thought Comey was thinking that Comey was the president. And it just did not sit well with the president. And he apparently had been looking for a way to pull off this termination of Comey, but in a way that made sense, or at least plausibly made sense. And so when he does this action on Tuesday, there are several bizarre things that just don't make sense anyway, and that's the timing of it in general, and the notion that he would send his former security chief from New York, who now works on his staff, that the president would send him over to the FBI headquarters to deliver the letter without knowing that his FBI director was in Los Angeles. A phone call could have determined that. And, I mean, if he really felt desperate about sending it right away, he could have had it sent to him in California. So the timing of that just smacks of poor judgment, but that's the president's call. I would simply say to you that the media has made it clear that the final decision that was made by President Trump was made approximately an hour before anybody got wind of it, and that includes his Sean Spicer and his communications team, and that it appeared as though the White House was in a bit of an uproar simply because there was never any time for the communications people to prepare an analysis of what had happened so that they could present it in a way that made sense to the public when the action had been taken. And
Bernard, let me ask you two points on, because I agree with this timeline you set out, that is basically what happened. But from your perspective, and having worked at the FBI, the president firing the head of the FBI, who's the head of, there are ongoing investigations into the Russia affair and everything that encompasses, as you said. I think that I see it as like, oh, okay, well, I think it's pretty clear that he did it to obstruct an investigation, which would be illegal and an impeachable offense. I think that, to me, is the most obvious explanation. But I'm not going to ask you to comment on that one, just on the methodology that the president used, and how do you feel rank and file FBI agents will react to that? It's the fact that James Comey was at an FBI gathering and, surrounded by agents. He was working, and he learned about it when it flashed on the television behind him. That smacks of disrespect at the highest level. Maybe incompetence that they just didn't make a phone call, but it also, to me, seems like it could just be a high level of disrespect. And then there's a sort of disrespect or even bullying sort of aspect to sending a bodyguard over to deliver this letter. And then third, the second paragraph in the letter that he actually sent, where he stated that he thanked Director Comey for 3 times in what the president says, verifying that the president was not under investigation, which is a very bizarre thing to put in that letter, because his whole excuse is that it's not about the investigation. But all of those together seem to me that they would smack rank and file FBI agents as incredibly disrespectful, not only of James Comey, but of the entire institution that is the Federal Bureau of Investigation. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, let me take the last point first. Thomas O'Connor, who is currently the president of the FBI Agents Association, that's the On-Board Agents Association, was interviewed yesterday. I believe it was by NPR, and I simply read an excerpt that was online. It may have been the entire conversation, because O'Connor said that he was riding a bike, riding in part of a stream of bicycles going up to Boston, I believe it is, in connection with Law Enforcement Memorial Week. And one of the things that Tom O'Connor, went on to say was that the rank and file members had told him over and over that they believe that Director Comey and the FBI will continue to work towards upholding the law and the Constitution today, tomorrow, and into the future. And then there were others, even if you caught today's congressional hearings, Andy McCabe said today that he had heard that White House officials had claimed that the FBI was in turmoil and that the agents would be reacting favorably to the termination and this, that, the other. And Mr. McCabe said he absolutely did not believe that, and that people had, for the most part, supported, he said almost everybody he talked to supported Director Comey in what he was doing. And now I'll take the position that both he and I take, and that is that as far as we know, the director of the FBI, James Comey, was a man of high integrity, and he believed in honesty, and he believed that when the FBI made an investigation, conducted an investigation, the investigation went wherever the evidence took them, and there was no consideration of no respecter of person. I'll put it like that. It didn't matter what party you belonged to. It didn't matter what your affiliations were or who your friends were. If there was evidence that you had done something wrong, the FBI is going to go after you. We've always done it that way, and we will continue to do it that way. And
because nobody is above the law.
Absolutely, absolutely. And this level of disrespect, I have never. Let me just say categorically that, in my mind, having now been through whatever means, having been elected as the president of the United States, I believe, and Noble takes the same position, that the goal of the White House and the federal agencies, all federal institutions, should be to find ways to make more strategic decisions that'll build more confidence in the government. And I don't think that these actions are reaching that goal. In fact, regardless of a person's political stripe, I simply take the position, and I've been watching presidents since Dwight D. Eisenhower, and I note that his presidency took place throughout my entire elementary school career, from 1952 to 1961.
Bernard, in the last 30 seconds here, just to want to let you finish your point.
Okay. I would simply say that any president who's in that White House should take the position that he is the president of the entire United States and all its citizens, and that he should not be taking any action whatsoever that seeks and actually winds up dividing this country, but that he should be doing all that he can to unite this country into one great republic, which is what all of us should stand for.
Bernard Thompson, retired FBI agent, thank you so much for joining us on the Thom Hartmann Program.
Again, thank you for having me.
And we'll have more of this great program right after this.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archives.
More of the Thom Hartmann Program right after this. Welcome back to the Thom Hartmann Program. I'm Alex Austin filling in, and I'm going to get in one more call, maybe two. Ron, you're on the line from Wisconsin.
Hello. I have a question for you. How do you think the world will look for the masses if the worldwide conservative movement is a success?
So how will the world look? Well, it'll be a bleak and desolate and demoralizing and despair-filled place for the many, while the few dance on their golden dance floors in their golden yachts, in their golden palaces, right up until the untenableness of that situation, where the many have nothing and the few have everything, means that inherent in that contradiction is the necessity of change. So it will look bleak and terrible, but it cannot last for long, because when you have millions, no billions of people with nothing and a handful with everything, that situation cannot last. I'm going to get another call in. Ron, thank you so much for your call. I am going to go to Ann in North Carolina. And Ann, you're on the line.
Hi, Alex. How are you?
Great. How are you?
Oh, I'm doing pretty good. Waiting on my first Social Security check. I'm going to get it May 24th.
Oh, fantastic.
Yeah. I've been semi-retired for about 10 years. I worked for DOJ for 21 and a half years.
Well, you earned those Social Security benefits, so those are yours.
Yeah, I sure did. And also, what's really interesting, when I turned 62, my pension dropped $600 a month. That's why I have no choice but to do my Social Security, and I want to do it anyway, So everything will be great once all that settles down. But with regard to Paul Ryan, I don't know if the listeners out there are aware of this, but his Wisconsin phones, he's rigged them so they ring busy 24/7. Nobody from Wisconsin can call their local Janesville office or Racine office or Kenosha office. They ring busy since about December, and I heard it actually started months before that.
And it's the act of a coward. It's the act of a coward, Paul Ryan.
And they also, you know, that's the only way they can win is they cheat.
That's true.
You know.
And Ann, I want you to know that he not only is he's such a coward that he won't listen. He won't take calls from his bosses, the people. He also locks the door on his office in Capitol Hill, which is unheard of. That's the people's building. He thinks it's his building. And, I mean, the man is a coward. That's all there is to it. He is a coward who looks surprisingly like Eddie Munster, except for the dead eyes that come with a lifelong desire of pushing millions of seniors into an early grave by stealing their money and their health care. And that is Paul Ryan. And he doesn't have the courage of his convictions because he knows that nobody shares those. He's the only one who's dreamed of impoverishing millions of people for decades. And thanks so much for your call. We'll be right back. Welcome back to the Thom Hartmann Program. The great honor that I have to guest host for Tom. It's Thursday. You're stuck with me for one more day, and then I promise Tom's coming back next week. But it is a great honor for me to get to sit in this chair, to talk to you all. I get to speak with really wonderful people, bring them in, and, you know, they all want to come on the show because of you. They want to join me here, take time to join me here. I mean, John Nichols, you know, just such an amazing thinker and writer, but he wants to come on because of you. Every one of my guests takes time to come on to speak to you. And I want you to really remember that. I want you to really remember where all the power resides, because it's in you. You are the ones who are going to defeat all of Trump's idiocy and his entire agenda. You are going to defeat the billionaires on Wall Street and their puppets, Paul Ryan and Mitch McConnell and all the rest of them in the Congress. You are going to win the fight over expanding health care so that it is a right for everybody and no longer an industry where our sickness is looked as a way of extracting profit. And instead, we're focused on wellness. It's you, it's us together raising our voices who are going to change this nation and this world. So thank you for allowing me to speak with you these last few days. And I'll be back for one more day on the Thom Hartmann Program tomorrow. I hope you tune in.
You've been listening to Thom Hartmann. For audio and video archives, visit thomhartmann.com.
The Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in
with
part
your
by
World
the
in
Aiden
2 minutes.
Forecast, an
Your host,
investment
Luke
newsletter
Farkas.
with weekly updates
South
of
Korea
leading
has a new
market indicators
president.
and a
His
monthly
name is
deep dive
Moon
into what the details of the
Jae-in, and his
economy and the
election draws
markets
to an
mean
end
for
10
investors and
years of
retirees.
conservative rule
On the
in
web at
South Korea.
aidenmarkets.com.
Moon has set himself apart on several issues of
Wines
significance
have some
from
of the
his
highest
predecessors,
pesticide levels in our
including
food
by
chain.
expressing an
This hour
openness
brought
to
you
hold
by
negotiations with
ecowine.com.
North Korea.
Pesticide-free
South Korean
wines,
politics
organic
is
wines,
often difficult
imported
to
from
observe
France
from the
by the
outside.
organic wine company,
Several large
ecowine.com.
family-run conglomerates called chaebol chaebols,
Thom Hartmann
which include
Program
Samsung,
is
LG,
brought
and
to you in
Hyundai,
part by
wield
Super
undue
Beets.
influence in South Korean
Beets are sourced
politics,
from
often behind the
non-GMO
scenes.
beets.
Moon has
And they're
pledged to
packed
clean
with
up the
dietary
chaebols and their
nitrates,
murky
helping to produce
relationship with the
nitric
government.
oxide for more
His
energy,
election
stamina,
message also
and
centered
support for
on
healthy
reducing
blood
rising
pressure
unemployment
levels
among South
naturally.
Korean youth.
For more information, call
Two cyber intelligence groups have linked a hack of French President-elect Emmanuel Macron to a Russian group also believed responsible for breaking into the Democratic Party ahead of last year's U.S. election.